You've been taught to fight life, to control everything, to always push harder, aim higher, chase more. But what if that's the reason you're tired all the time? What if all that forcing, fixing, and overthinking is what's keeping you stuck? They said success comes from control, from never stopping, from always doing. But if that were true, why do so many people who have it all still feel lost? Why do you still feel anxious, restless, like something's missing? The truth is, life was never meant to be forced. It was meant to flow. Tonight, we're not here to add more to your to-do list. We're here to let go of the pressure, the noise, the need to always have the answers. And in that letting go, you'll find something better. Stillness, clarity, freedom. For thousands of years, Buddhist wisdom has whispered a quiet truth. Peace isn't found in controlling life, it's found in allowing it. Not by chasing, but by trusting. Not by gripping, but by releasing. These teachings aren't just old words in a book, they're a doorway to a quieter mind, a lighter heart, a life that moves with you, not against you. As you listen tonight, something will shift. The tension will start to melt. The thoughts will slow down. And for the first time in a while, you'll feel safe to just be. This isn't just another audio to fall asleep to. This is the start of your return to flow. So take a breath. Let the weight drop. You've carried enough. And now, let's begin. You've felt it, that sudden rush of emotion, the tightening in your chest when someone says the wrong thing, the sting of disappointment, the wave of anger, the quiet ache of sadness. It shows up out of nowhere, and before you realize it, you're deep in it. A single thought turns into a storm, a passing feeling becomes a trap. But what if it didn't have to? What if you could feel it all, without holding on to any of it? Not by running, not by numbing, but by seeing clearly. That's what this is. That's where we begin, not with some huge moment, but in the smallest space, the breath before a reaction, the pause between thoughts, the flicker of awareness that says, this too will pass. This is Anicath truth, that everything changes, constantly. It's not a concept to memorize, it's a way to meet life. And once you see it in action, not just in theory, everything begins to soften. Not in some magical instant, but breath by breath, moment by moment. You've been told to control emotions, to fix them, to fight them. But what if that's why you suffer? What if the peace you've been chasing is already here, quietly waiting behind your grip? Anika doesn't ask you to escape your experience. It invites you to experience it more deeply with the full understanding that it won't stay. You might notice it first in small things, a sudden irritation when someone cuts you off, the heaviness that follows a mistake, the lingering anxiety after a hard conversation. Normally, you cling, you replay it, you react. But if you pause and notice what's really happening underneath the surface, something shifts. That anger that felt so solid, it's already different than it was a minute ago. That fear, it's already fading. Emotions aren't fixed. They're like weather systems moving through your inner sky. You don't have to stop the rain. You just need to stop building houses in storms. Most suffering doesn't come from the emotion itself, but from what the mind builds around it. You feel sadness, and then suddenly you're telling yourself a story. This always happens to me. I can't handle this. Something's wrong with me. The emotion becomes a judgment, and the judgment becomes a cycle. But if you catch it early and say gently, this is just what's passing through me right now, you don't have to go down with the story. You feel the wave, but you don't drown in it. You breathe and you allow it, and slowly you realize it's already changing. It always was. There's a quiet power in noticing how things shift. The breath you're taking now wasn't here a second ago. That tightness in your chest, feel it again. Is it the same as it was when you first noticed it? Really look. Most people don't. They label it, then react. But when you stay curious, when you just watch without interfering, you'll see how emotion rises, peaks, softens, and fades. You don't have to push it out. You don't have to pretend it isn't there. You just have to stop feeding it stories. This doesn't mean becoming passive. It means becoming wise. When you truly see that everything changes, you don't rush to fix what isn't permanent. You meet what's here with gentleness. You don't resist it, and you don't grasp at it. You simply let it be. And in that allowing, it starts to shift on its own. This is what liberation feels like, not dramatic, not loud, but quiet and steady like water wearing away stone. Even happiness becomes softer when you understand anicca. You stop clinging to good moments, afraid they'll slip away. You stop chasing highs, thinking they'll last forever. And because of that, you enjoy them more. You taste the sweetness of life without needing to own it. You let things move through you with open hands. The joy of impermanence is that everything becomes more precious not because it lasts, but because it doesn't. This practice begins now, wherever you are. You don't need to be in a monastery. You don't need years of meditation experience. You just need to notice. When you feel a wave of emotion, breathe. Let it be there. Don't rush to understand it. Don't turn it into a problem. Just be with it. Like sitting with a friend who needs no advice, only presence. That's what you offer your own heart. Presence, without judgment, without control. And if you forget, that's okay. Start again. This isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. One moment at a time. There will be times when the emotion feels overwhelming, when you want to escape it or act on it. But if you can just pause just for a few seconds, you'll find that something inside you is bigger than the feeling. Something steady, something still. That's your awareness. That's the part of you that doesn't come and go. That's the place you return to every time you remember to stop clinging. Over time, you'll begin to trust it. You'll see the patterns of your mind more clearly. You'll notice how a thought becomes a story, how a feeling becomes an identity, how quickly you go from "I feel sad" to "I am sad" to "I've always been this way." And you'll start to interrupt that loop, gently, kindly, without force. You'll say, "This is just what's happening right now," and you'll let it pass through, like wind through open windows. Anicca teaches you that nothing stays. And that's not depressing, it's freeing. It means you don't have to hold on so tight. You don't have to control every outcome. You don't have to fear change. Because change is what makes healing possible. Change is what allows joy to return. Change is what lets you breathe through the hard parts, knowing they will move. There is so much power in seeing clearly, in staying present with what is, instead of trying to manage what might be. The more you rest in that awareness, the more peace you feel. Not because life is easier, but because you're not at war with it. You stop fighting the moment. You stop needing it to be different. And when you stop resisting, you free up all that energy. Energy you can use to heal, to grow, to love, to be. Not as someone with no emotions, but as someone no longer ruled by them. You'll start to feel more at ease in your own body. You'll notice your shoulders relaxing, your breath deepening, your mind softening. You won't have to try so hard to be okay. You'll just be. That's what awareness gives you, a home you can return to, no matter what's happening outside. You don't need to fix every thought. You just need to see it. And in that seeing, it loses its power over you. This is the medicine of presence. The more you practice, the more it becomes natural. You'll catch yourself in moments you never noticed before. The tight jaw, the racing thoughts, the sudden spike of defensiveness. And instead of reacting, you'll breathe, you'll feel, you'll let go. Maybe not right away, maybe not every time, but more and more, until letting go becomes a habit, until peace becomes your resting place. And you'll see that none of this is about avoiding life. It's about engaging with it more fully. When you stop clinging to how things should be, you start appreciating them as they are, even the hard parts, even the uncomfortable ones, because you know they won't last. You know they're here to teach you something, and when they've taught you, they'll leave. That's how the mind works. That's how healing works. That's how life flows when you let it. So let it. Let the breath come and go. Let the emotion rise and fall. Let the moment pass without trying to hold it. You don't have to be the master of your emotions. You just have to be their witness. You don't have to fix everything. You just have to feel it and let it move. The storm doesn't need your fear to pass. It needs your stillness. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are the awareness behind them, the space they pass through. And that space is where freedom lives. Keep returning to it. Keep trusting it. Let it hold you, moment by moment, breath by breath. This is how life flows. Naturally. And now, so do you. You're beginning to see it now. That peace doesn't come from avoiding, fixing, or forcing. It comes from allowing, from loosening your grip on what passes through. But there's one thing most people never think to let go of. The one thing they cling to harder than anything else. The one thing that creates most of the tension, the comparison, the confusion. That thing is the idea of you. Not your real self, but the version your mind built. The image you carry around. The one made of stories, labels, roles, opinions, memories. It sounds like, this is who I am. I'm just not that kind of person. People like me don't do things like that. And without realizing it, those sentences become a cage. Not a visible one, but a tight, invisible script that keeps playing in your head and shaping how you respond to life. This idea of self seems helpful. It feels like stability, like grounding, but it's not. It's pressure. It's a demand to keep acting in line with your past. It tells you, stay consistent, be predictable, defend the story. But life doesn't work like that. Life is movement. And flow is impossible if you're constantly checking back to make sure you're still being the you think you're supposed to be. The ego doesn't just show up in arrogance or loudness. It appears in the quiet thoughts that say, I can't, I have to, they'll think less of me, that's not like me. It shows up in the need to protect your image, to avoid being misunderstood, to prove something. It's subtle, but heavy. It's what makes you feel small in rooms full of people. It's what makes you overthink before speaking. It's what makes you question yourself even when your heart is clear. When you start seeing this, everything begins to open, because you're not being asked to get rid of your identity. You're just being asked to stop clinging to it, to stop confusing it for who you really are. You can still have a name, a voice, preferences, opinions, but without the weight of needing them to define you, without the need to defend them as truth. When that pressure lifts, life starts to breathe again. Every identity you wear was shaped by something: your childhood, culture, past experiences, relationships, fears, traumas, praise, rejection. And while those things shaped you, they are not you. They are conditions, not essence. When you begin to see that, you stop personalizing everything. You stop holding on so tightly to being right, being seen, being validated, because you realize there's something more peaceful than being someone. It's simply being. Flow comes naturally when you stop checking your reflection, when you stop measuring yourself against past versions, when you let go of the inner narrator always whispering, "This is who I am," because that narrator doesn't speak from truth. It speaks from fear, from habit, from comparison. And when you quiet it, what's left isn't emptiness, it's freedom. You've been taught to build a strong identity, to find your passion, your path, your true self. But maybe the truth isn't found in building, but in dissolving. Maybe clarity comes not when you define yourself, But when you become quiet enough to see who you are without labels, when you feel safe enough to not perform, when you no longer need to be anyone in particular, there's a calmness in not needing to be understood, in not needing to explain, in simply acting from presence without referencing your past. That's not forgetfulness. That's freedom. You respond instead of react. You move with what's needed, not with what fits the story you've carried. Think about how often you say, I am anxious, I am shy, I am smart, I am not good at that, I am this, I am not that. Each time, the mind shrinks your whole being into a fixed definition. And that definition becomes a boundary. You start to live inside that shape. You limit what you try, who you meet, how you show up. Not because the world is limiting you, but because your own mind is. That's the grip of identity. But the truth is, you are not a thing. You are not a noun. You are a verb. You're not the story. You're the awareness the story passes through. You're not your habits. You're not your patterns. You're not your preferences. Those things may arise, but they are not you. When you see that, even for a moment, it's like something unclenches inside. You stop needing to fix or prove or explain. You just are. Letting go of identity isn't erasing your personality. It's releasing the demand for consistency with a past that no longer fits. You're allowed to change. You're allowed to evolve. You're allowed to contradict yourself. Growth is contradiction. It's the undoing of who you thought you were. And if you hold too tightly to old versions of you, life will feel like a constant struggle. The idea that you have to figure yourself out can become a prison, as if your job is to find the perfect label and wear it forever. But what if you didn't need to be figured out? What if you could be a little messy, a little uncertain, a little different each day and still be whole? That's not confusion. That's presence. That's the truth showing up in real time, without pretense. You stop asking, who am I supposed to be right now? And instead ask, what's needed in this moment? The answer might surprise you. It might be silence. It might be boldness. It might be stillness. It might be laughter. And when you're not stuck in identity, you can meet the moment fully, not as a role, but as presence itself. This is how you start to flow. Effortless action arises because there's no longer resistance. You don't have to protect a story. You don't have to be seen a certain way. You're not guarding an image. You're just here, responsive, awake, at ease. The more you trust that, the more energy is freed. You don't waste it trying to be liked or proving you're right. That energy becomes clarity. It becomes compassion. It becomes movement aligned with truth. Even your spiritual identity can become a trap. You start trying to act spiritual, speak a certain way, avoid certain emotions, maintain a peaceful mask. But all of that is more identity, more control. The truth is, awakening isn't about being more of anything. It's about being less of what you're not, less defended, less reactive, less attached to how you appear. In this space, love becomes lighter. You don't need someone to validate your worth. You don't enter relationships as a role, or a fixer, or a savior. You just show up with presence, not persona. That kind of love flows because there's no pressure behind it. It doesn't need constant reinforcement. It doesn't collapse when misunderstood. It doesn't rely on identity to exist. Even creativity expands when you're free from identity. You stop making art to be seen as talented. You stop writing to be called wise. You stop performing to be applauded. You just express what wants to come through. And what comes through is more honest, more alive, more original, because it's not filtered through who you're supposed to be. There's a humility that grows here. Not the kind that puts you down, but the kind that no longer needs to lift you up. You stop needing to feel special to feel whole. You stop needing recognition to feel real, because you already feel rooted. You don't need an identity to be complete. you already are. This dissolving is gentle. You don't force it. You don't rip away your sense of self. You just notice the places where clinging creates tension. You notice how often you edit your words to protect an image. You notice when you feel defensive or not because something true was said, but because something threatened your story. That noticing is enough. Awareness starts the loosening. The more you watch the mind build identity, the more space you feel. A thought arises. I'm not enough. And you see it. Just a thought, not a truth. A memory surfaces. People like me never succeed. And you see it, just a pattern, not reality. A label echoes. I'm too sensitive, too loud, too quiet, too much, not enough. And you see it, a collection of words that you don't need to keep. You get to live without boxing yourself in. You get to show up without armor. You get to be more of yourself by needing less of an identity. And that's where the real strength lives, not in knowing who you are, but in not needing to, in trusting that whatever rises from awareness is already enough. This kind of trust doesn't come from thought. It comes from presence, from sitting with yourself quietly again and again until the noise fades, until the roles fall away, until all that's left is breath, stillness, and awareness, alive and empty and full. You won't find yourself in the mirror of the world. You'll find yourself in the silence underneath everything the world reflects. There's no identity in flow. There's only participation, only openness, only responding with full attention, without agenda. You're not trying to win. You're not trying to prove. You're not trying to fix your image. You're just here, and being here fully is the most honest thing you'll ever do. So, let the old ideas fall away. Let the need to be seen a certain way dissolve. Let the story unravel. You are not here to live as a fixed idea. You are here to move, to grow, to change, to flow. And flow doesn't ask you to be someone. It asks you to live from the stillness that needs no name, to speak from the depth that needs no title, to love from the freedom that needs no role. This is how you return to yourself. Not the small, limited self made of labels, but the spacious self that was never born and never broken. The self that doesn't speak in words, but in presence. The self that doesn't need approval, because it was never separate to begin with. Here, there's nothing to prove, nothing to defend, nothing to hold, just life, flowing through you, and you flowing back into life, quietly, effortlessly, free. When you stop clinging to who you think you are, something quieter starts to guide you. Not a voice from outside, not a role you have to perform, but an inner sense that knows how to move without force, how to act without trying to impress, how to live without constantly adjusting your mask. That stillness doesn't need identity to function, but there's something else it needs: balance. Not the kind of balance that's perfectly still, the kind that breathes, adjusts, responds. A living balance. A way of moving through each day that keeps you upright, not by holding you stiff, but by keeping you soft enough to respond to life in real time. That's the middle way. Not a rulebook, not a theory. A practice, a rhythm, a steady hand in the swirl of extremes. The middle way isn't about standing still. It's about not getting pulled so far in either direction that you lose your center. Life constantly throws options, reactions, urgencies at you, pulling your mind toward indulgence or denial, pushing your heart toward reactivity or suppression. It's easy to swing to the edges: too much, too little, too fast, too withdrawn. The middle way helps you feel the pull before it takes you. It gives you a way to check your position before you tip over. This path isn't about staying neutral, it's about staying awake, not being frozen between opposites, but fluidly navigating between them. You start seeing in each moment: am I overreaching or holding back? Am I forcing or avoiding? Am I acting from fear or from clarity? These questions don't always come with words. They arise as felt sense, as subtle discomfort or ease, as tension or breath. You learn to listen to that feedback before it becomes suffering. When you start using the middle way as a real-time practice, it changes the way you make decisions. You don't ask, "What's the right thing to do?" in the rigid sense. You ask, "What's balanced right now?" Because what's right isn't always fixed. It depends on awareness, timing, inner state. The same action can be compassionate one day and reactive the next. That's why this path isn't about copying wise behavior, it's about cultivating wise perception. Every situation becomes a chance to feel where you are. Someone says something hurtful. One part of you wants to strike back, another wants to shut down completely. But there's a third option, the one that pauses, breathes, and responds from steadiness. Not passive, not aggressive, just grounded. The more you notice this space, the more it opens up. The more you learn to live from it, the more peace you carry in conflict. This isn't a moral tightrope. It's not about perfection. It's about dynamic balance. Like walking, you're never perfectly still. You're constantly adjusting. You're leaning slightly left, then right, then center again. Each movement is correction. And yet, from the outside, it looks like flow. Life is the same. Every conversation, every task, every choice is a chance to feel your weight, your footing, your breath, and correct gently. Balance is not found in rules, it's found in response. That's why clinging to structure too tightly can throw you off. Discipline without flexibility becomes rigidity. Freedom without structure becomes chaos. The middle way isn't between chaos and order, it's the dance with them. You feel when you're pushing too hard, when you're escaping, when you're overthinking, when you're drifting, and you bring yourself back. Not with punishment, with awareness. This awareness sharpens with practice. You begin to see how extremes show up in subtle forms. Not just loud reactions, but small habits, overcommitting to please others, avoiding rest out of guilt, numbing emotions instead of meeting them. Each one pulls you off center. The middle way doesn't shame you for that. It simply invites you to return. Returning is a moment-to-moment choice. It starts in the body. You notice tension in your jaw, that's a sign. You notice rushing thoughts, that's another. You pause. You feel your breath. You reconnect to what's here now. That's not a delay, it's wisdom in motion. Every time you return to that center, you're training your nervous system to trust presence over panic. This practice isn't distant or lofty, it's practical. You use it while responding to an email, while deciding what to say in a hard conversation, while choosing whether to speak or stay quiet. You sense, am I centered? Am I aligned? Or am I reacting from a wound? The answer doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it's a tight stomach. Sometimes it's a deep exhale. You learn to read your own signals. You start to notice that the pull toward extremes often comes from fear. Fear of being wrong, of being rejected, of losing control. The middle way doesn't ask you to fight fear. It asks you to stay rooted while fear moves, to feel the pull without letting it carry you. You don't need to win, you just need to stay. Stay present, stay curious, stay kind. Kindness is part of balance. It's what keeps discipline from becoming self-punishment. It's what makes you rest without guilt. It's what lets you say no without anger, and yes without self-erasure. Without kindness, balance becomes a performance. With kindness, balance becomes support. You start choosing actions not because they look good, but because they feel true. Feeling truth requires slowing down. Not always physically, but mentally. You start questioning the speed at which you make decisions, form opinions, jump to conclusions. You begin to sense that real clarity isn't fast, it's steady. The middle way teaches you to give space before reacting. Space for nuance, space for truth to surface. Not because you're unsure, but because you're deepening. This deepening touches everything. You don't just eat mindfully, you sense what kind of nourishment you actually need. You don't just listen to others, you feel where your listening is coming from. Is it genuine presence or a need to fix? Is it curiosity or control? The middle way turns routine moments into sacred opportunities for clarity. Not because you're forcing meaning, but because you're paying attention. Attention becomes your guide. You stop needing strict rules because your awareness becomes sensitive enough to guide you. You feel imbalance early. You adjust early. And when you miss it, you don't spiral, you simply come back. That's the heart of this path. Always returning, never punishing, just adjusting. Over time, this path helps you hold paradox. You stop needing black and white answers. You get more comfortable with not knowing. You stop needing to define everything in advance. Because you realize truth reveals itself in presence, not in over-planning, not in overthinking, in being. This makes you more flexible, not less grounded. Because your grounding comes from clarity, not rigidity. You begin to move differently, speak differently, not with hesitation, but with care, with attentiveness. You start making fewer decisions from impulse and more from alignment. You start living less from should and more from sincerity. And this sincerity is what keeps you in balance, because you're always centered, but because you know how to return to it. There is nothing passive about this. It takes courage to live in the middle, to not react when provoked, to not numb when overwhelmed, to not prove yourself when judged. That strength doesn't come from force, it comes from presence, from holding your ground gently, from acting without needing to control the outcome. Even in rest, the middle way helps you stay awake. You stop swinging between burnout and collapse. You stop using productivity to outrun worthlessness. You rest before the crash. You nourish without guilt. You pause without apology. That's not laziness, that's intelligence. You begin to trust that presence is more powerful than performance. And when life gets intense, you don't need to disappear into distraction or numbness. You stay in contact with what's real. You breathe. You feel. You respond as best you can. And when you fall into old habits because you will, you don't shame yourself. You return. You recalibrate. You keep learning. That's balance. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering how to move without losing yourself, how to speak without posturing, how to listen without disappearing, how to feel fully without becoming the feeling. That's what balance means. Here, not 50-50, not perfection, but presence. Not staying in the middle out of fear, but out of wisdom. As this becomes your way of being, it gets quieter. You don't talk about balance, you live it. People feel it in your calm, in your steady decisions, in your timing. You respond when others rush. You stay soft when others harden. Not because you're better, but because you're present. And presence knows the difference between reactivity and response. This presence creates spaciousness in your mind, in your body, in your relationships. You start noticing how much tension you used to carry, how much energy you used to waste swinging between extremes. Now that energy returns to you. It becomes clarity, compassion, resilience. You stop burning out. You stop bouncing between control and collapse. You live steadier, breathe deeper. Even under pressure, you move with awareness. You can act quickly, but not impulsively. You can be strong, but not harsh. You can say no, but not from fear. You can say yes, but not from guilt. That's not balance you achieve once, it's balance you maintain, one breath at a time. There's nothing to prove, nothing to chase. The middle way isn't a destination, it's a home, a place you return to when the world pulls you apart, a rhythm you move with when everything else gets loud. You don't cling to silence, you don't cling to noise. You walk through both, with awareness. That's enough. And when you live this way, others feel it. Not because you preach it, but because your presence makes space for theirs. You don't try to fix them. You don't try to save them. You meet them where they are, while staying rooted in your own balance. That's the most generous thing you can offer. This path continues every day, in small moments, in deep breaths, in gentle corrections. You don't need to get it perfect. You just need to stay close to presence. Let awareness lead. Let kindness soften. Let wisdom guide. And no matter how far you sway, always return to center. This is the art of living well, not through control, but through calibration, not by freezing, but by flowing, not by being right, but by being real. This is the middle way, not as a theory, but as a lived experience, a path you walk with your whole being, quietly, steadily, with breath, with clarity, with peace, even with balance. Something deeper still pulls at you. You pause, you breathe, you respond with awareness, and yet, without knowing why, you sometimes fall into the same reactions, the same thoughts, the same emotions. Patterns you didn't choose, but feel caught in. The loop repeats, not because you aren't trying, but because something underneath the surface is driving the wheel. Something older than your latest insight, older than your conscious mind. These are Sankaras, deep mental formations that live beneath your daily awareness. They're not just habits, they're impressions, accumulations, emotional grooves worn into the landscape of your mind by years of reacting the same way to similar triggers. They're the leftover energy of what you've clung to or pushed away, fear that stayed too long, anger that didn't release, pain that you numbed instead of felt. And they don't just disappear with understanding. They operate silently, waiting for the right moment to reappear. You can think of Sankaras as the residue of reaction. Every time you react without presence, a mark is left behind. Over time, those marks harden into tendencies. The tendency to withdraw, to lash out, to shut down, to crave attention, to avoid conflict. They feel automatic because, in a way, they are. The body remembers. The nervous system holds them. The mind continues the loop, not because it's bad, but because it believes it's keeping you safe. These formations disrupt your natural flow. They block awareness. They cloud your ability to see the present moment for what it is. Instead, you respond to the past projected onto now. You aren't speaking to what's in front of you, you're reacting to something stored deep inside. Someone criticizes you, and it's not just their words that hurt, it's every old wound they touched without knowing. This is why presence sometimes slips, even when you know better. The Sankara speaks before you do. Letting go of Sankaras isn't about effort, it's about awareness. You don't rip them out, you don't shame them away. You meet them, you feel them. And most of all, you allow them to rise without reacting to them again. That's the detox. Not avoidance, not suppression, but full conscious presence with what's surfacing. When these formations come up, they don't always feel logical. You might feel fear with no danger, shame with no crime, sadness without reason. The mind rushes to explain, but explanation isn't release. What these formations need is space, non-resistance. You give them room to move without giving them more energy. That's how they weaken. That's how they dissolve. Awareness is the fire that burns these residues, clear not violently, but gently. When you remain still as the discomfort rises, you break the cycle of reaction. You stop feeding the old loop. You don't reach for distraction. You don't follow the story. You stay with the raw sensation. You breathe, you soften, you let it express without acting on it. And over time, the pattern fades. This requires trust that you can feel intensity without collapsing, that you can meet your oldest pain without it owning you, because Sankaras are persistent. When you stop reacting, they sometimes scream louder, not to punish you, but because they're unraveling. They're surfacing to be seen fully, maybe for the first time. Stay. Stay through the discomfort, through the shaking, through the flood. Not because you enjoy it, but because you're not afraid to feel anymore. You're not healing through control. You're healing through presence, through witnessing the truth of what lives in you. Every time you do this, the nervous system releases something it was holding. The breath deepens, the body loosens, the pattern loses strength. That's the process, not dramatic breakthroughs, but consistent honesty, quiet courage, repetition of presence. Sometimes sankharas appear in thoughts that seem urgent. The mind will say, "You have to fix this now. You have to do something." But urgency isn't clarity, it's residue. The need to fix is often the fear being disguised. The wisest choice is often to wait, to feel, to listen, to move only when the inner noise has settled. Because if you move from compulsion, the pattern rewrites itself. But if you stay still, it unwinds. Detox doesn't mean feeling nothing. It means stopping the habit of turning feeling into reaction. You don't make the emotion go away. You allow it to pass without becoming it. That gap between sensation and response, that's the ground where sankharas lose their roots. That's where you free yourself without force. This isn't a quick process. Some sankharas are from early in life, some from years of repetition, some passed down from family, culture, collective fear. They come with layers. And each time they arise, they give you a chance to fight, but to free. You don't have to know their exact story. You don't need a detailed map of your past. You just need willingness to feel without escaping. As you detox, subtle shifts begin. Reactions become slower. Words carry less defensiveness. You start noticing when you're about to act out of habit and pause. The pause is powerful. It's where new patterns are born, where new space opens. You realize you don't have to follow every thought. You don't have to obey every urge. You can be aware without being controlled. That's when flow returns, not as a reward, but as a result of not blocking yourself anymore. The effort you used to spend reacting, suppressing, overthinking it, becomes energy for movement, clarity, creativity. You don't need to constantly heal, you start to live from healing, not because the pain is gone, but because it no longer leads. And yet, there's no arrival point. Sankharas rise in layers. Some patterns stay quiet until you're ready to meet them. Life brings triggers not as punishments, but as invitations. Each challenge, each discomfort, each stuck moment is a chance to uncover another hidden reaction. You stop fearing these moments. You meet them with curiosity. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening again?" you begin asking, "What is this showing me?" That simple change softens the whole experience. You become a student of your own inner world, not a fixer, not a judge, just a witness, a participant in your own liberation. As old tendencies loosen, your presence gets lighter. Interactions become less loaded. You don't brace yourself before speaking. You don't rehearse how to be. You don't carry tension into every conversation. That's not because life got easier, but because you're not projecting as much onto it. You start recognizing when your words are coming from clarity or from residue. The tone shifts. The timing changes. You stop interrupting yourself with the need to perform. And in that silence, your truest responses emerge rehearsed, not filtered, just real. This realness makes connection easier. You no longer meet people through layers of defense. You listen with your whole body. You speak without overcompensating. Even your eyes soften. And people can feel that. They sense you're not trying to prove something. You're just present. And that presence creates safety not only for them, but for you. Sankhara work brings you home to your body. Because many of these formations aren't mental, they're physiological. The chest that always tightens, the shoulders that lift, the gut that braces. Awareness teaches you to live inside those sensations without shutting down. You don't need to escape. You learn to stay. And the more you stay, the more space returns, not just inside you but around you. You no longer fill the silence with unnecessary noise. You're okay not having the last word. You're okay not having the answer right away. That quiet is what replaces the old rush. You stop needing intensity to feel alive. Aliveness comes from stillness now. Sometimes sankharas release in unexpected ways. Tears without a story, shaking without fear, dreams that stir something loose. Trust the body's wisdom. It knows what it's doing. You don't need to analyze everything. You just need to support the release. That means staying hydrated, resting, moving slowly, saying no when your energy is low. Your system is doing deep work. Honor that. This process rewires you, not just emotionally, but energetically. What once drained you doesn't affect you the same. What once triggered you now passes through. You feel more stable in joy, more grounded in sadness. You don't swing as far. You don't collapse as fast. That's not numbness, that's strength. You start sensing other people's sankharas too. Not to judge but to respond with compassion. You recognize when someone is speaking from a wound. You don't need to match their reactivity. You hold your space. You don't take it personally, because you know what it's like to be caught in a reaction that doesn't match the moment. This doesn't mean tolerating harm. It means recognizing what's yours to carry and what's not. You become more clear about boundaries, not as defense, but as clarity. You stop overextending. You stop absorbing what doesn't belong to you. You move from sovereignty, not from guilt. Eventually, this awareness becomes background. You don't need to practice it all the time. It becomes how you live, not always with effort, but with ease. Presence becomes your default. Old reactions may still visit, but they don't stay long. They don't lead. They don't define you. You walk differently, sit differently, speak differently, not because you're performing peace, but because you're no longer fueled by unrest. You're not living to escape your patterns. You're living from beyond them. That's not perfection. That's maturity. Not because you've mastered everything, but because you've stopped hiding from anything. This is what Sankhara Detox gives you. Space. Inside your breath, inside your choices, inside your emotions. You don't always know what's coming next, but you no longer meet it with the weight of your past. You meet it with presence. And in that presence, you're finally free to respond not as a product of your conditioning, but as the clear awareness you've always been, quietly, without force, and fully alive. As the weight of unconscious patterns begins to fall away, something lighter takes its place, not passivity, not escape, but a quiet sense of clarity. No longer reacting from old pain, no longer pulled by automatic habits. You find yourself with space to move, to speak, to act. But now, a new question arises. How do you move through life with presence without falling back into striving? How do you engage fully without being driven by the need to prove, fix, or rush? This is where the heart of Appamada begins to unfold, not in effort as force, but in effort as presence. A kind of alertness that isn't aggressive, a dedication that isn't exhausting, a way of showing up that honors both the moment and your natural rhythm. This is the path of effort without struggle, diligence without tension. Most people are taught to push, to always try harder, to chase goals with urgency. If something isn't working, the answer must be to apply more force. And if you slow down, you risk being left behind. But this conditioning creates inner pressure, the kind that tightens your breath, clouds your mind, and makes even simple tasks feel heavy. The moment you begin to think you have to fight for peace, you've already stepped out of it. Appamada doesn't mean doing less. It means doing from a different place. It means shifting from effort rooted in fear to effort rooted in clarity. You're not acting because you're panicked. You're not moving because you're behind. You're engaging because there's an inner sense of rightness, no pressure, no panic, just a steady commitment to presence. This kind of diligence is soft and alert. It doesn't resist the moment, but enters it with attention. When you move from appamada, you aren't rushing to the next thing. You're fully with what's here. If you're washing dishes, you're washing them with care. If you're having a conversation, you're listening without waiting for your turn to speak. The doing happens, but it flows from presence and from a tight need to finish, succeed, or achieve. Non-striving doesn't mean being lazy or detached. It means your actions are free from grasping. You do what needs to be done, but without the added layer of mental pressure. You're not trying to control the result. You're not turning the present moment into a tool to get somewhere else. Instead, you trust that right effort, grounded in awareness, brings about right outcomes without needing to force them. This approach transforms how you relate to your goals. You can have direction without obsession. You can move with intention without hardening into control. Your energy becomes more sustainable because it's not constantly drained by anxiety. You're not working from fear of failure. You're working from connection to what matters now. That connection nourishes you, even when the work is hard. You begin to notice when effort turns into strain. There's a subtle shift. You go from flow to friction, from openness to contraction. The breath shortens, the shoulders tense, the mind rushes. This is your signal, not to stop, but to recalibrate. You don't need to abandon the task. You just need to return to presence. Drop the mental weight. Feel your body. Let the action come from alignment, not urgency. Appamada is diligence with wisdom. It's effort that understands timing. Some things require stillness. Some require boldness. Some need patience. Some ask for surrender. Mindful effort feels the difference. It doesn't treat every problem the same. It doesn't apply the same pressure everywhere. It listens, it adjusts, it acts, but never out of fear. This way of moving also helps you avoid burnout, because what wears you down isn't just doing, it's the mental resistance that piles on top. It's the self-judgment, the internal deadlines, the belief that rest means failure. With appamada, rest becomes part of the rhythm. Pausing isn't falling behind, it's part of moving wisely. You're not abandoning your path. You're honoring your limits. This isn't indulgence, it's intelligence. When you allow yourself to pause, to step back, to feel before acting, your work deepens. Your relationships soften. Your mind clears. You become more responsive, less reactive. The energy you used to spend forcing life now supports you in living it fully. You begin to act from spaciousness. You're not driven by what others expect. You're not reacting to what you fear. You're simply doing what the moment calls for, from a place of internal steadiness. That steadiness isn't passive, it's alive. It's alert to what's needed and willing to act without being dragged by emotion or pressure. This also transforms your sense of discipline. Most people think discipline means forcing yourself to do things you don't want to do, but true discipline is something different. It's choosing what aligns with your deepest values, even when it's uncomfortable. It's staying connected to your intention, not just your impulse. And when that discipline is guided by presence, not punishment, it becomes a joy. You're not fighting yourself. You're walking with yourself. There's a deep respect in this way of living, respect for your energy, respect for your body, respect for time. You stop seeing yourself as a machine that has to produce. You start seeing yourself as an instrument of awareness. Your value isn't measured by how much you do, it's measured by how present you are in what you do. This helps you let go of comparison. You stop measuring your path against someone else's speed. You stop believing that faster is better, that louder means more important. You start tuning in to your own rhythm. You move when it's time. You rest when it's time. You listen to what's real, not what's expected. This inner alignment brings peace not because everything is easy, but because you're not at war with your own pace. Even in ambition, this clarity remains. You can have big dreams without being consumed by them. You can take bold action without turning your life into a race. You're not proving your worth. You're expressing your truth. That expression doesn't need to be forced. It arises naturally when you stop trying to push life faster than it's ready to move. This kind of effort feels light in the body. You might be busy, but you're not frantic. You might be challenged, but you're not rigid. The movement is there, but it's graceful. You're in contact with what's essential. You don't waste energy on overthinking, on pleasing, on rushing through tasks just to finish. Every step becomes intentional. Every breath a reminder that this moment matters, not just the result. Appamada allows you to stay steady even when life gets difficult. You're not crushed by setbacks because your effort isn't tied to outcomes. You're committed to presence, not perfection. When things go wrong, you adjust, you learn. You keep showing up not because you're forcing yourself, but because something deeper is moving you. That deeper movement is what matters most. It's not flashy, it doesn't scream, but it's consistent. It carries you when motivation fades. It grounds you when things fall apart. You're not running on adrenaline. You're rooted in awareness. You don't need to hype yourself up to take action. You simply act when it's time, and rest when the moment is complete. This also changes how you relate to success. You stop chasing moments of validation. You stop needing constant proof that you're doing well. Your success becomes how well you stayed present, how honestly you showed up, how clearly you acted from intention. That kind of success can't be measured in numbers, but you feel it in your body, in your breath, in your peace. And when failure comes, as it always does, you meet it differently. You don't collapse, you don't panic, you reflect, you respond, because you're not ashamed of effort. You're not ashamed of trying. You're not driven by fear of falling. You're guided by a deeper rhythm, and that rhythm allows room for everything: success, failure, silence, motion. Nothing is wasted. This is what it means to walk through life awake, to give your energy fully without holding back, but also without clinging, to love what you do without becoming trapped by it, to stay alert to what matters and relaxed about what doesn't. That's the art of mindful non-striving. It's not about doing nothing, it's about doing without tension. As this way of living deepens, you stop postponing peace. You don't say, "I'll relax when I'm done." You relax while doing. You don't wait for everything to be perfect before you feel okay. You feel okay now, and let that calm move through your actions. Your effort becomes love in motion. Your presence becomes your power. And others feel that too. You become someone people can trust. Not because you're flawless, but because your energy is stable. You don't bring panic into the room. You bring groundedness. You're not trying to control others. You're responsible for your own state. That kind of presence is rare and powerful. This doesn't mean you're always calm, but even when you're upset, you're conscious of how you act. Even when things feel hard, you know where to return. You don't abandon yourself. You stay. You move through it, not around it. And you do so with as much grace as the moment allows. That's what real effort looks like. It's not measured in struggle, it's measured in sincerity, in presence, in consistency. In your willingness to show up again and again with an open heart and a steady hand, not for praise, not for approval, but because it's the most honest way to live. And when you live this way, you stop chasing flow. Flow becomes your default, not because everything is smooth, but because you are. You're no longer pulled by extremes. You're no longer reacting from fear. You're acting from clarity. And that clarity is what makes your effort effortless. Appamada is not a destination. It's a moment-to-moment practice, a way of remembering what matters most, a commitment to live awake, to love without force, to act without clinging. You don't need to rush, you don't need to fix, you just need to stay with what's real. And from that place, life moves, quietly, clearly, without struggle, without strain, only presence, only flow, only effortless effort. The more you live from presence, the less you need to hold. When effort becomes aligned instead of forced, life stops feeling like something you have to push through. There's less grasping, less defending, less performing. What begins to surface in this stillness is something even subtler, a kind of lightness that doesn't come from getting what you want, but from seeing that you don't have to hold so much in the first place. Not your roles, not your thoughts, not even the idea that things should have fixed meaning. This is where the depth of sunyata reveals itself, not as a concept to believe, but as a space to live from. Emptiness, in this sense, doesn't mean void or lack. It means freedom from fixed form. It means the openness beneath appearances. It means not being confined by what something seems to be. When you see clearly, you begin to notice that everything you hold onto, every belief, identity, emotion, relationship, is shifting, always changing. And yet, you keep trying to freeze it, define it, name it, turn it into something permanent. This grasping creates weight, tension, friction. Not because anything is wrong with life, but because you're trying to control what can never be held still. Sunyata is the realization that everything you cling to is empty of fixed essence. Your job isn't who you are. Your thoughts aren't the truth. Your emotions aren't permanent. Even your relationships are not fixed objects. They are living, breathing fields of interaction, constantly moving, reshaping. When you stop forcing life into solid shapes, something opens. You begin to relate to the world differently. Instead of treating people like characters in a script, you meet them with fresh eyes, without assumptions, without the past pressed over the present. You stop needing your relationships to fulfill a story. You stop needing labels to feel safe. You start allowing space between words, between reactions, between expectations. In work, this openness becomes creativity. The less you fixate on how things should be, the more you start noticing what's actually possible. You stop trying to make your role fit a rigid identity. You allow the task to unfold through presence, not pressure. This doesn't make you less focused, it frees your attention. You no longer resist change. You no longer need every plan to stay intact. You work with what's real, not what's frozen in your mind. Thoughts lose their grip when you see their emptiness. Not because you fight them, but because you stop mistaking them for absolute truth. You notice how quickly they arise, how they shift, how one thought contradicts the next. This doesn't make them meaningless, it makes them light. You can think clearly without being trapped in thought. You can observe the mind without being owned by it. The freedom of sunyata is not detachment in the cold sense. It's intimacy without stickiness. It's depth without density. It's being fully engaged while knowing that nothing needs to be possessed, that you don't need to carry everything you touch, that even the most beautiful experiences don't need to be held onto. This opens the heart in unexpected ways. Love becomes less about keeping and more about being with. You don't demand someone stay the same. You don't panic when dynamics shift. You begin to see that connection doesn't depend on control, that love can flow more freely when it isn't tied to ownership or permanence. You trust the natural rhythm of closeness and space. Letting life be empty doesn't mean letting it be meaningless. It means seeing that meaning is something that arises fresh from each moment, not something imposed from the past. The more space you give to your experience, the more clearly you feel what really matters. You begin to see the difference between what's real and what's just residue. This way of being softens conflict. You stop needing to win arguments because you no longer take every idea as an extension of your identity. You don't have to defend every belief. You can listen with openness, speak with honesty, and allow the space for disagreement without tension. That doesn't make you passive, it makes you grounded. In daily life, this shows up in small ways. You feel less disturbed when plans change. You're not thrown off by delay or disruption. You move with the shifting weather of events because you're no longer clinging to a solid picture of how things must go. That adaptability isn't indifference, it's wisdom. It's knowing that flow is only possible when your grip softens. Emptiness reveals itself most clearly in silence. Not just outer silence, but inner silence. The space between thoughts, the pause between emotions, the stillness beneath your activity. This silence isn't absence, it's potential. The potential for clarity, for fresh insight, for a deeper kind of presence that doesn't come from thinking more, but from thinking less. You begin to see how much of your suffering came from mistaking what's temporary for something permanent. You held on to roles, outcomes, ideas. You resisted change. You tried to find solid ground in a world made of movement. Sunyata isn't about making peace with change, it's about seeing that change is the only thing that was ever real. When you relax into that, fear softens. In relationships, this brings ease. You don't need constant reassurance. You don't need to monitor every shift. You allow others their space to change, to grow, to move. You stop seeing people as fixed and start relating to their presence instead of your idea of them. That presence is what makes connection real, not roles, not expectations, but moment-to-moment openness. The more you live from this space, the more friction falls away. You don't resist what arises. You don't cling to what passes. You don't demand certainty from things that were never designed to be certain. And in that openness, something subtle emerges. A joy that doesn't depend on getting what you want. A peace that doesn't depend on everything going your way. This peace isn't passive, it's alive. It breathes with you. It shows up in how you move, how you listen, how you let go without shutting down. You start seeing that emptiness is what allows everything to happen. It's not a void, it's the canvas, the space in which all experience appears and disappears moment by moment. Even your sense of self becomes lighter. You stop defining yourself by history, labels, performance. You stop carrying the need to be consistent with who you were. You allow yourself to evolve without apology. You become a space through which life moves, not a fixed character trying to hold a shape. That's not losing your identity, it's letting it breathe. This space is not something you create. It's what remains when you stop filling every moment with thought, every silence with noise, every action with judgment. When you stop clinging, space appears. And in that space, truth can speak. You begin to know yourself not through analysis, but through direct experience. Not as an idea, but as a presence that doesn't need explanation. In this emptiness, compassion grows. Because the more you see that everything is moving, the more you stop judging people for being in process. You know that reactions aren't permanent. That pain isn't identity. That mistakes are part of movement. You become more patient, not by trying harder, but by seeing deeper. You also become less reactive. There's room inside you now, room between stimulus and response, room to breathe before speaking, room to feel before deciding. That space doesn't mean detachment. It means you're no longer trapped in automatic patterns. You respond with clarity, not compulsion. Sunyata turns urgency into presence. You stop rushing to resolve every emotion. You stop needing to fix discomfort immediately. You allow what arises to rise fully. You give it space. And in that space, it often resolves. It's not because you solved it, but because you let it unfold. This affects how you create, how you build, how you lead. You don't impose structure too soon. You give ideas time to ripen. You trust the unfolding process. You don't fear the unknown, you meet it with curiosity. You allow room for not knowing, which is where true creativity begins. Even your spiritual path becomes lighter. You stop chasing enlightenment as a destination. You stop needing to feel a certain way to believe you're growing. You realize the path is not about adding more eights, about removing what blocks, what's already here, what's already awake, what's already whole. Sunyata invites you to live from spaciousness, to trust what opens when you stop forcing, to listen more than you speak, to feel more than you explain, to allow more than you control. That trust changes your pace. Your rhythm slows, not from laziness, but from awareness. You stop trying to outrun yourself. You start walking with life. That walk becomes simpler, not in what you do, but in how you hold it. You stop measuring your worth by output. You stop organizing your value by comparison. You just keep returning to presence. That presence becomes the ground from which all action arises, not scattered, not desperate, but clear and steady. This is how emptiness fills you, not with answers, but with clarity, not with beliefs, but with openness, not with more ideas, but with less noise. You don't become disconnected. You become more real, more available, more free. You don't need to explain this to anyone. You just live it, quietly, fully, moment by moment, meeting life as it comes without grasping, letting it move through you without resistance, letting each breath carry what it must, and releasing what it no longer needs to hold. This is what it means to live spaciously, to let things come, to let things go, to stay soft in a world that wants you hard, to remain open, even when closing would be easier. That's not weakness. That's strength without armor. Sunyata doesn't offer control. It offers freedom, not from life, but from the illusion that you have to hold it all together. You don't. You never did. You're already held by something deeper than thought, something wider than form, something spacious enough to let everything be exactly as it is and still feel whole. Keep letting go, keep softening, keep trusting the space between things. That's where truth lives. That's where peace breathes. That's where you begin again, with nothing to carry and everything to feel. Spacious, light, free. When you stop clinging to form, something softens. You stop needing life to fit a shape it was never meant to hold. You stop gripping every thought, every role, every moment. That space you, open spaciousness of mind, of breath, of awareness, doesn't erase pain. It simply reveals that pain doesn't have to trap you. Even within openness, discomfort still comes. Loss still comes. Grief still moves through the body. But now, you meet it differently. You stop sinking into it. You learn how to stay on top of it. You learn how to ride the wave. This is the shift, the part that changes everything, the moment when you stop treating suffering as something wrong and start meeting it as something workable. Dukkha, the core Buddhist term for suffering or unsatisfactoriness, is not a mistake. It's part of the fabric. It shows up not because life is broken, but because things change, people change, expectations break, and the mind resists what is. There's no bypass here. This isn't about avoiding or sugarcoating pain. It's about developing a new relationship to it, one where pain is not your enemy, where hardship is not your identity, where discomfort is no longer a reason to collapse, but an invitation to wake up. The suffering you feel does not need to drown you. It can show you how to stay afloat. It begins with presence, not presence as a technique, but as an orientation, being willing to feel without judgment, to allow what hurts without needing to label it as failure. The body contracts around discomfort. The mind reacts to avoid it. But what happens when you stop pulling away? When you stop fighting the current and start learning its movement? Pain is energy. It rises, it peaks, it moves. It speaks in sensations, in pressure, in heat, in tension. It wants to be felt, not analyzed. When you meet it fully, not with your head, but with your attention, it begins to move differently. The resistance starts to melt. And in that melting, you find space where there was once only tightness. This space is not comfort. It's capacity, the ability to stay, to not run, to not numb. Not because you're trying to prove strength, but because you know your avoidance creates more suffering than the pain ever could. What you suppress doesn't disappear, it stores. And what you turn toward eventually softens. You don't need to fix every emotion. You don't need to resolve every thought. You need to become the witness that stays steady while the storm moves through. Even grief has movement. Even heartbreak has rhythm. When you learn to feel without clinging, every wave of pain becomes something you can ride instead of sink into. This doesn't make you detached. It makes you stable. Your sensitivity doesn't decrease, your capacity increases. You begin to understand that pain can open you instead of break you. That hardship can deepen your presence instead of stealing it. Suffering can be fuel for insight, for compassion, for wisdom, but only if you stop treating it like poison. To float on dukkha is not to celebrate it, but to stop fearing it, to stop turning every discomfort into a catastrophe. To notice that most of what makes suffering unbearable is the way you tense around it, the stories you add to it, the resistance you pile on top of it. Pain alone is manageable. It's the mental reaction that turns it into torment. You start by naming what's true. There is pain, there is loss, there is confusion, but then you pause before the narrative begins. You don't need to build a house around the pain. You don't need to turn it into identity. You don't need to decide who you are based on what hurts. You just feel, directly, honestly, without story. The breath becomes your anchor. Every inhale, a return to what's real. Every exhale, a letting go of what's extra. You don't breathe to escape the pain. You breathe to make space for it, to hold it with dignity, to say, even this has room here, even this belongs. When you stop labeling discomfort as failure, you begin to learn from it. Every hard moment becomes a teacher. Every emotional contraction shows you where you're still attached, where you still want control, where you still expect something solid in a world that moves. This kind of clarity doesn't always feel good, but it frees you. And freedom, in time, brings a peace that comfort never could. You also learn to spot the habits that rise from pain, the avoidance strategies, the defensiveness, the habits of overworking, overthinking, isolating. You see how pain often isn't the issue, your reaction to it is. And when you start catching these habits as they arise, you stop strengthening them. You interrupt the pattern. You make space for a new choice. This doesn't mean you'll never fall. You will. You'll still feel overwhelmed sometimes. You'll still want to check out. But you'll return faster. You'll remember sooner. You'll recover with less damage. That's the result of practicing no perfection, but resilience. Your resilience isn't built by avoiding suffering. It's built by turning toward it, again and again, without collapse. Like learning how to stand in deeper and deeper water. At first it knocks you down, but over time your legs learn the rhythm. Your body finds its balance. You stop fearing the wave. Even joy changes in this space. It becomes quieter, more grounded. Not a high you need to chase, but a lightness that arises when you're no longer crushed by every difficulty. You feel the joy of simply being able to stay present, to not run, to not be pulled under by life's inevitable storms. Pain becomes less personal. You stop thinking, why me? And you start seeing, this is part of being alive. Everyone suffers. Everyone loses. Everyone feels grief, fear, doubt. This realization doesn't make you cold, it makes you connected. You stop isolating in your pain. You feel less alone, because you know you're walking a human path. From that place, compassion grows, not as an idea, but as a lived experience. You see others in pain, and you don't flinch. You don't need to fix them. You simply know what it feels like, and you stay with them. That staying becomes the most powerful thing you can offer. Your presence becomes medicine. You also become more honest with yourself, with others. You stop pretending to be okay when you're not. You stop hiding your struggles out of shame. Vulnerability stops feeling like weakness. It feels like alignment. You'd rather be real than perfect. You'd rather be true than polished. This honesty creates intimacy. It softens your walls. It invites others to show up fully, without fear of judgment. When you're no longer terrified of your own pain, you stop fearing theirs. And that mutual recognition builds something strong: trust, connection, healing. It all begins with being willing to face what hurts. As you keep meeting dukkha with clarity, your baseline changes. You stop expecting life to be painless. You stop waiting for all discomfort to go away before you start living. You begin to live in the middle of it, fully. Not because it's easy, but because it's real, because presence doesn't require comfort. It only requires willingness. You stop delaying peace. You stop saying, "I'll feel free when this ends." You start saying, "I'll feel free by staying open now, not later, not after everything is fixed, but here, with this breath, with this ache, with this moment, exactly as it is." And from that place, something surprising happens. Gratitude arises, not for the pain itself, but for your ability to hold it. Gratitude for the strength you didn't know you had. Gratitude for the depth of presence suffering invited you into. You begin to see that everything you ran from had something to teach you. That learning changes how you move forward. You stop needing guarantees. You stop needing life to go a certain way. You walk with presence, not with fear. You walk with courage, not because you feel brave, but because you know you don't need to be fearless to keep going. You know you just need to stay open. This openness is where freedom lives. Not beyond pain, but within it. Not as escape, but as awareness. When you no longer turn pain into a problem, you stop drowning in it. You float. You feel the movement. You rise and fall, but you don't sink. You ride the wave, steady and awake. This is not an escape from suffering. This is a new relationship with it. One that honors it, one that allows it, one that transforms it. Because in that transformation, you meet something deeper than relief. You meet resilience. You meet presence. You meet the truth that you are more than what hurts. You are the awareness holding it all. So, when pain comes, you don't run. You breathe. You feel. You stay. You let it move. And in its passing, you find not only relief but wisdom, depth, strength, and the quiet knowing that nothing you face will ever be more powerful than your ability to remain present. You float, you ride, and you rise. As your relationship to pain begins to soften, you no longer feel the need to react to it in predictable ways. You learn to hold discomfort without collapsing. You let the wave pass through you without gripping it or letting it define your next move. This shift in your inner world naturally begins to ripple outward, especially in the way you speak. Words are not separate from your thoughts or emotions. They are how your inner world touches others. And now that your inner world is less reactive, less tight, it's time to explore how to speak without clinging, how to use your voice without building karma with every sentence. Most people don't realize how much weight they carry in their words. A comment isn't just a comment, it's a release of emotion, an attempt to prove something, a defense of an identity, a plea for approval, or an effort to dominate. So much speech isn't really about communication, it's about control, it's about clinging. Words become a way to hold on to certainty, to push away discomfort, to shape how others see you, to get a sense of self that feels solid, even if it's temporary. But when your speech is driven by attachment, it always creates some kind of entanglement. It either hooks others into your own unresolved emotions, or it hooks you into theirs. Either way, it pulls you out of presence and into story. And story is where conflict grows, because stories defend themselves. They have a point to make. They need to be believed. And when you speak from story instead of clarity, it becomes almost impossible to listen, to learn, or to connect. Non-clinging speech is not about saying less. It's about saying what is needed without holding on. It means releasing the need to be right, letting go of the need to be praised. Speaking with honesty, but not with grasping. Communicating clearly, but not controlling how others receive it. You still speak, you still express, but you don't carry tension in your words. You let them go the moment they leave your lips. This doesn't mean being passive or silent. It means learning to listen to your intention before you speak. Why are you about to say this? Is it to defend yourself? To gain sympathy? To push someone to act a certain way? Or is it to bring clarity, offer truth, share presence? The motivation behind your words matters. It's what determines whether your speech leaves peace or residue behind. One of the reasons clinging speech is so common is because it gives a quick feeling of relief. You lash out and feel powerful for a moment. You over-explain and feel temporarily safe. You interrupt and feel heard for a second, but that relief is shallow, and it usually creates more suffering, later misunderstanding, regret, defensiveness. The cycle continues. Presence gets buried beneath the noise. With mindful speech, you pause before that first impulse. You feel the urge to correct someone harshly, and you breathe. You feel the desire to share something just to be seen, and you question it. You sense the habit of explaining too much, and you ask yourself whether silence would carry more strength. Not every thought needs to become a sentence. Not every emotion needs to be shared instantly. Stillness can be more honest than words if the words are not clean. When you do speak, clarity becomes the guide. You say only what is necessary, not to be vague or evasive, but to avoid inflating your message with extra emotion. You speak in a way that's kind without being soft, truthful without being cruel, firm without being hard. You don't decorate your sentences to manipulate. You don't raise your volume to dominate. You speak as if your words are tools for connection, not weapons of control. One of the most powerful shifts in this practice is learning how to release the outcome of your communication. You can speak from your heart and still be misunderstood. You can offer truth and it may still be rejected. You can express yourself with full integrity and not receive the response you hoped for. Non-clinging speech means allowing this to be okay. You do not force understanding. You don't bend yourself to be accepted. You release your part with clarity and let go of what isn't yours to carry. This opens a new kind of space in conversation. You're no longer trying to steer the moment. You're present with it. You listen without plotting your next point. You speak without tightening around your message. The interaction becomes alive, something shared instead of controlled. That doesn't mean it's always easy, but it becomes honest, and honesty, held in presence, heals more than any clever argument ever could. In moments of conflict, this becomes even more important. You're triggered. Your body wants to react. Your thoughts sharpen. You feel the rising impulse to say something that will land, something that will protect you or prove your point. But in that space of awareness, you see it. You see how much energy is behind the words forming in your mouth, and you choose not to speak until that energy settles. You stay, you breathe, you watch the emotion rise and fall. And when the time comes to respond, the words are clear, measured, not manipulative, not defensive, just what's needed and no more. Over time, this changes how you view communication entirely. It stops being about winning, or even about being understood. It becomes about staying connected to truth, even when it's hard. About offering presence instead of performance. About responding instead of reacting. This doesn't always make conversations smoother, but it makes them cleaner. You don't carry regret afterward. You don't replay what you should or shouldn't have said. You were there, fully, and you spoke from that presence. This kind of speech also dissolves hidden tensions in your relationships. People may not know why they feel safer around you, but they do, because your words don't carry hidden hooks. You're not subtly manipulating, guilt-tripping, or demanding. Your voice becomes something others can trust, not because it's perfect, but because it's sincere. Even your inner speech begins to shift. You stop narrating every emotion. You stop creating drama out of discomfort. You notice the stories forming in your mind and you don't believe all of them. You start speaking to yourself with the same clarity you offer others. You stop clinging to internal commentary that fuels self-doubt or judgment. You create space in your own mind by letting go of unnecessary commentary. This inner spaciousness supports your outer communication. The less reactive your inner world, the more responsive your words. You're not as easily hooked by others. Their moods don't dictate your speech. Their projections don't throw you off. You stay steady, not because you're detached, but because you're not trying to control anything. You're rooted in presence, not in performance. You also learn the art of not speaking. You realize silence isn't awkward, it's powerful. You stop rushing to fill space. You give others room to find their words. You let quietness say what words cannot. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can offer is your silence, not as withdrawal, but as attention, as reverence for the depth beneath the noise. When you do speak, your words carry energy that comes from stillness, not reaction. People can feel this. It's not about the vocabulary you use, it's about the awareness behind it. You can say something simple and it lands deeply because you meant it. You weren't posturing, you weren't trying to prove, you were just present. This changes how you apologize, how you set boundaries, how you express care. Apologies become sincere, not performative. Boundaries become clear, not confrontational. Expressions of love become gentle, not needy. Everything becomes more honest, not because you're trying harder, but because you're holding less. Letting go of attachment in speech is not about detachment from people, it's about releasing control over how communication unfolds. You say what you need to say, then you release. You listen without planning a rebuttal. You speak without tightening around your image. And when the conversation ends, you don't replay it endlessly in your mind. You let it go. Even difficult conversations become opportunities for growth. You're no longer afraid of disagreement. You don't collapse at the first sign of tension. You trust yourself to speak clearly, and you trust others to respond however they need to. That mutual respect builds a foundation where honesty can thrive. This kind of communication begins to feel effortless, not because you're doing less, but because you're clinging less. Your energy isn't spent protecting your ego, managing perceptions, or chasing approval. It's directed into presence, and from presence, your voice flows naturally, cleanly, without the weight of need. Over time, speech becomes an offering, not a tool. You offer truth, you offer clarity, you offer care, not to get something back, but to express what's real. This is what allows your words to carry power, not volume, not polish, but sincerity rooted in awareness. You begin to feel how every word is a choice, and that choice can either deepen connection or create distance. You're no longer careless with your language. You don't use sarcasm as a shield. You don't hide truth behind politeness. You speak in ways that free, not bind, that open, not trap, that heal, not divide. This is the heart of non-clinging speech, not restraint, but freedom. Not silence for the sake of silence, but words that rise from stillness. It's how communication becomes part of your path, not just as a social skill, but as a spiritual practice, as a mirror for your inner clarity, as a tool for living lightly and honestly in a world that's often loud and reactive. You keep speaking, you keep listening, but now each word becomes a step, each silence a breath, each conversation a chance to offer presence without needing to hold on. You speak, and then you let go. You listen, and then you let go. And in that letting go, something beautiful happens: connection without control, truth without tension, and the quiet knowing that speech, when rooted in awareness, always leads you home. When your words no longer carry the tension of needing to control outcomes, when speech becomes an offering instead of an extension of ego, life begins to feel lighter. Communication loses its edge of urgency. But there's another current, deeper and quieter, still pulling at you. It's subtle, almost invisible. A hum beneath everything you do, the sense that time is running out, that you should be further along, that this moment isn't enough because another one is always waiting. This is time thirst, the quiet craving that keeps you out of presence, not always through planning or thinking about the future directly, but through the belief that now is not complete, that the next moment holds something better, that meaning is somewhere ahead, waiting for you to arrive. And so your mind moves constantly forward, occasionally backward, rarely still. Letting go of this thirst doesn't mean abandoning responsibility or ignoring practical time. It means ending the addiction to future-focused thinking that drains your attention from what's here. It means recognizing that awareness is not trapped inside the clock, that you don't need more time to find peace, you only need less attachment to time's story. In Buddhist thought, the Dhamma is described as akaliko, timeless, not because it ignores the passage of hours or days, but because truth doesn't depend on linear movement. What is real can be known now, not after you improve, not when life feels easier, not once you've earned it, but in this moment, as it is, without delay. The mind resists this. It's been trained to chase, to map progress, to mark milestones. Everything is measured: success, healing, awakening, even rest. The belief runs deep. If you're not moving towards something, you're wasting time. But this creates tension in the body, restlessness in the mind, and dissatisfaction in the heart. Even when things are calm, part of you waits for the next moment to validate your worth. To release this pattern, you don't force yourself to stop thinking about time. You begin by noticing how often your thoughts are tied to it. You pay attention to the subtle ways you project into the future. The quick mental check of how long something will take, the silent pressure that you should be doing something more productive, the background belief that now is only valuable if it leads somewhere. Once you see it, you don't need to fight it. You simply return to what's here: the breath, the sound, the feeling in your hands. You realize that this moment doesn't need to lead to another to be complete. It can just be, and that's enough. Not conceptually, but experientially. You begin to feel the fullness of a moment when it's not being used as a stepping stone. This shift isn't dramatic, it's quiet, a slow dissolving of mental momentum. The mind will still create plans, remember events, hold appointments. That's not a problem. The suffering arises when those mental movements become who you are. When you forget that awareness doesn't move through time, time moves through awareness. You begin to sense the difference between being in time and being aware of time. The former keeps you chasing. The latter lets you observe without being pulled. You can still prepare for tomorrow. You can still recall yesterday, but you stop living in those thoughts. You stop letting them define what's possible now. The feeling of urgency fades, not because life slows down, but because you stop measuring yourself against imagined timelines. You don't need to accomplish more to feel valid. You don't need to reach a certain point to feel complete. the very pressure to become starts to fall away, replaced by the quiet reality of being. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you precise. When you're not rushing, you act with more clarity. You speak when it's needed, not when you're anxious. You rest without guilt. You create without grasping. You work without losing your center. Because time is no longer chasing you, it becomes a tool, not a trap. You also stop fearing time's passage. Aging becomes less threatening, change becomes less disorienting, because you're no longer trying to freeze life in place. You begin to understand that what you really feared wasn't time, it was missing it. And now, being here fully, you're not missing anything. This depth of presence can't be forced. It's allowed. It unfolds as you release your grip, as you stop believing every thought that pulls you forward. You might still plan your week, but you don't live inside those plans. You return again and again to the stillness that's already whole, already free. Even your relationship to memory begins to change. The past is no longer something to fix or relive. It becomes a gentle presence in the background, informing but not defining. You can honor what's happened without losing yourself in it. You can feel what once hurt without becoming it. Because you are no longer shaped by time, you're grounded in awareness. When you're anchored in this now, the mind stops needing certainty. You don't need to predict what comes next. You meet it when it arrives. You respond instead of anticipating. That responsiveness becomes your path. Not because you know where it's going, but because you trust your ability to meet each moment clearly. This is where you begin to feel life in its fullest. Not in the rare highs or the milestones, but in the quiet hum of presence, the taste of food, the tone of a voice, the way light moves across a wall. These moments are not preparation for later joy. They are the joy. The more you live here, the more the obsession with next starts to dissolve. Even in difficulty, presence brings relief. Pain feels sharper when you resist it, when you want it to pass quickly. But when you stop waiting for pain to be over and just feel it now, without story, something loosens. You don't need to know how long it will last. You don't need to rush its departure. You hold it gently and let it unfold in its own rhythm. You begin to live in alignment with how life actually works, not as a straight line, but as a living current. Some days move fast, others slow. Some feel open, others dense. But none of them are wasted. You stop needing each day to prove something. Being here becomes enough. Doing what's needed becomes enough. This frees you from comparison, because comparison is always rooted in time, who got further, faster, who started before you, who arrived first. But when you're no longer measuring progress as worth, you stop playing that game. You stop needing to compete with someone else's timeline. You let yourself move in rhythm with your own clarity. This rhythm cannot be forced. It must be heard, felt, allowed. And the more you stay in presence, the more it speaks. You know when to act. You know when to rest. You don't need to calculate every step. You simply remain awake to what the moment asks of you. This is not stagnation, it's aliveness. Because presence is never stuck. It's dynamic, responsive, fully engaged. The difference is that now your action isn't driven by fear of missing out, it's guided by truth. There's no longer a race, just real movement, grounded in now. Eventually, you begin to sense something even deeper. That now is not a sliver between past and future. It is not fleeting, it is the whole field. Everything you've ever experienced has only happened in this now. Time appears to move, but awareness remains. Still, whole, unchanging. You rest there, not as an escape, but as the place from which all of life flows. You speak from there, you listen from there, you walk from there. And you begin to understand why the teachings say the Dhamma is timeless, because truth does not wait. Awakening is not later. It is here. It is now. Always now. Letting go of time thirst doesn't mean abandoning your life. It means entering it fully, releasing the illusion that peace is elsewhere. Trusting that this moment, touched with full attention, reveals more than any future ever could. You are not late. You are not behind. You are here. And that is everything. Stay here. Keep releasing. Keep breathing into the space that has no schedule. Let the mind move, but don't follow. Let the future unfold, but don't chase. Let now hold you not as a concept, but as your home. The only place you've ever truly been. The only moment that ever was. And the only one you ever need. When you stop chasing time, life becomes quieter. The urgency fades. Your attention returns. You stop measuring the moment, and instead, you begin to experience it. But as stillness settles, you may notice something more subtle that continues to stir beneath the calm: thought. It keeps moving, with or without your permission. It appears like wind, like whispers, like noise in the background. Some thoughts rise softly, others with force. Some pull at you, some confuse you, and many seem to appear from nowhere. The question is, what do you do with all of them? Most people don't notice how automatically they engage with thought. A thought comes, and instantly it becomes real, believed, chased, defended, and without meaning to, you begin building around it. You construct an identity, a storyline, a mood, and before long you're not observing thought, you're inside it, you're reacting to it, trying to solve it, pushing it away, holding on. That's the dam, and it's heavy. The practice is not to stop thought. That's not possible nor necessary. Thought is part of the mind's nature. The shift is learning how to observe without interruption, to stop building dams and let the stream flow. Thought can pass like water when you stop trying to hold it still. This is where clarity lives, not in control, but in relaxed awareness. Vipassana meditation gives you a way to practice this directly. It trains your attention to see thought as movement, not truth. You don't analyze, you don't suppress, you witness. You recognize thought as an object, no different than a sound or a sensation. It comes, it goes. It isn't you. It doesn't need to be acted on. It only needs space. The process begins by anchoring in the body. Breath, posture, sensation. These are steady. These are here. As you rest your awareness, thoughts will still arise. They may try to pull you into planning, remembering, judging. You simply notice. Label softly thinking, planning, remembering, and return. Not with frustration, with gentleness. Over and over. At first, this feels repetitive. The mind seems wild. But in time, a gap forms, not between the thoughts themselves, but between the thought and your reaction. You begin to watch without attachment. You see that the thought is not a threat, it's just passing energy, a formation, a habit. It doesn't require your involvement. It doesn't define you. This realization brings relief, because so much mental exhaustion comes not from thought itself, but from believing you need to fix it all. Most of the thoughts that arise don't need solving. They only need witnessing. When you stop interfering, they move on. Like clouds, like weather. They belong to no one. They come, they pass. You remain. As you develop this skill, your relationship with thought softens. You stop resisting negative thoughts. You stop clinging to positive ones. You treat them all with the same gentle curiosity. You realize that thought is not the enemy. Clinging is. Aversion is. The attempt to force clarity when the mind is naturally shifting is what causes confusion. In this stillness, your real intelligence begins to rise. Not the kind that solves with pressure, but the kind that perceives directly. You start to feel decisions before you form them. Clarity doesn't come from effort, it comes from space. When thought flows freely, intuition emerges. Not as guesswork, but as insight from a mind that isn't tangled. This insight doesn't come on demand. It arises when the mental clutter thins. That's why stillness is not about thinking less, it's about relating to thought differently. When thought is not held tightly, the deeper mind has room to speak. You sense what's aligned. You recognize truth by feel, not by debate. Your attention sharpens not from narrowing, but from openness. You also begin to notice the patterns of thought more clearly. The repeated stories, the fears that recycle, the internal voices that imitate past voices. You don't need to change them directly. You watch. And by watching, you loosen their hold. A thought that's seen clearly loses its grip. It can't control what you no longer believe. This watching becomes a way of life, not just a meditation practice. You observe how thought shapes your posture, your speech, your reactions. You catch yourself before you say something reactive. You pause before a defensive comment. You don't interrupt. You don't withdraw. You stay with the inner movement and choose how to respond. This is freedom not from thought, but within it. Even difficult thoughts begin to lose their threat. You see anger arise and don't tense. You watch doubt surface and don't panic. You don't turn away. You don't get swept away. You hold steady, like standing in a river without needing to stop the water. You are not fragile here. You are aware. This doesn't make you distant or removed. It makes you intimate with experience. Because now you're meeting life directly, not through the filter of analysis, not through the haze of interpretation, but through the freshness of each moment. Thought still moves, but it doesn't separate you from what's real. There's also a shift in how you speak. You think more clearly before speaking. You pause naturally. You're not editing yourself, you're allowing the space to hear yourself. And what comes out is more honest, more rooted, because it's not rushed. It's not shaped by anxiety. It's arising from awareness, not habit. This deep listening to your own mind changes how you relate to others. You see how much of communication is people talking through their thoughts, not from their presence. You stop taking things personally. You sense when someone is speaking from fear. You don't respond to the words alone, you feel what's underneath. And often, silence is your answer. You become less reactive in conflict, not because you're suppressing thought, but because you're not entangled with it. You hear your own internal commentary and let it pass. You hear the other person's emotion and stay with it. You don't agree or disagree immediately. You rest in awareness until something clear arises. This presence becomes your boundary. It protects without pushing. Over time, you discover that the mind is never the problem. The problem is believing every thought. Clarity isn't found in controlling the river. It's found in allowing it to move while you remain grounded on the bank. You become less afraid of mental movement. You trust your capacity to observe, to let go, to respond only when needed. Even creativity shifts. You stop forcing ideas. You let inspiration arise from the quiet space between thoughts. You don't rush solutions. You wait, you listen, you allow the unknown. This patience becomes a strength, because now your work flows from awareness, not from pressure. This also transforms how you process emotion. Emotions are not separate from thought, they're often fueled by it. You feel anger, and thought fans it. You feel grief, and thought replays it. But when you watch both the emotion and the thought that feeds it, you hold space for healing. You don't need to suppress feeling, you simply stop adding commentary. As this observation deepens, the self-story starts to dissolve. The narrative that says who you are based on thought begins to lose power. You don't need to be the thinker. You are the awareness that sees thought arise, that sees emotion swell, that sees identity shift, and in that seeing, you are free. This isn't abstract, it's direct, practical. You're not escaping life, you're entering it more fully, without defenses, without illusions, without needing every thought to be true. You remain soft but awake, engaged but not tangled. That clarity allows you to move through life with more ease, more grace, more wisdom. Vipassana is not just a technique, it's a mirror. It shows you what's real beneath the noise. And once you've seen it, you stop needing certainty. You stop needing the mind to be quiet before you act. You trust awareness to guide you. You stop fighting the river. You float, you navigate. You let the current carry what it needs to. You build nothing. You block nothing. You simply remain. And in this remaining, you find peace. Not the peace of silence, but the peace of freedom. Thought continues to move, life continues to change, but you are no longer grasping. You are no longer building dams in a river that was never meant to be stopped. You're watching, listening, moving when it's time, and resting when it's not. This is how insight becomes action, how presence becomes power, not from thinking more, but from clinging less, not from stopping the mind, but from seeing it clearly. Again and again, you return to the river, not to control it, but to remember, you are not the flow. You are the space through which it flows. And in that space, everything you need is already waiting. Quiet, clear, free. When you no longer believe every thought, when you stop reacting to every mental wave, what's left is not emptiness, it's space. That space isn't dull or passive, it's alive. It holds everything without needing to change anything. This space is what lets the mind breathe. It's where awareness rests without gripping, where wisdom speaks without needing volume. And it's within that very silence that a new form of clarity begins to appear, not through movement, but through stillness. Not from doing, but from being. Stillness is not the absence of life, it is the foundation of it. It's not what happens when all activity stops. It's the depth within every moment of activity that isn't rushed. True stillness isn't about outer conditions. It isn't waiting for the world to be quiet. It's an internal posture, one that listens deeply. It's the willingness to pause, not because you're lost, but because you know something meaningful often arises in the space between things. There is a silence inside you that is never disturbed. You may forget it, you may get swept up in noise, but it's always there, untouched, unwavering. Returning to that silence doesn't mean shutting out life. It means listening to it in a new way. It means not needing constant stimulation to feel real. It means honoring the pause before the next thought, the breath before the next word, the stillness before the next move. When life becomes busy, most people look for relief through more doing, solving, fixing, explaining. But that only deepens the noise. The real answer is often the opposite: to stop, to rest in that quiet space where answers arise on their own, to listen without trying to understand, to trust that movement is not the only way to progress. Intentional stillness is not laziness. It is deliberate and full of presence. It's what allows your energy to gather, your vision to return, your direction to become clear again. Without these pauses, even the most skillful action loses its precision. When you act from constant noise, your energy is scattered. But when you act from stillness, your movement becomes clean, uncluttered by fear or impulse. The most powerful shifts often happen in silence, not because silence changes the world, but because it changes how you see the world. In that silence, your perspective recalibrates. You notice what truly matters and what was just habit. You see clearly where your energy belongs and where it doesn't. You feel your breath, your body, your presence as ideas, but as direct, living experience. Stillness teaches you how to hold discomfort without collapse. It shows you how to meet uncertainty without rushing to escape it. It allows you to stay with what's real, even when it's raw. Because when you're not pushing for the next thing, you start feeling the fullness of what is. You stop treating the present like a means to an end. It becomes the whole path. You begin to understand the difference between being still and being stuck. Stuckness is resistance. Stillness is allowing. Stuckness closes down. Stillness opens up. Stuckness waits with tension. Stillness rests with attention. This awareness dissolves the fear of pausing. It reveals that you are not falling behind by stopping. You are actually returning to the source of all clarity. In stillness, your senses come alive. You hear more. You feel more. Not emotionally overwhelmed, but present in a way that allows life to touch you without knocking you over. Stillness helps you feel the moment without needing to add anything to it, without judging it, without speeding past it. This also transforms how you interact with others. You stop rushing to fill every silence in conversation. You give people space to speak fully. You listen without preparing your reply. You meet them with presence instead of pressure. And when silence arises, you're not afraid of it. You trust it, because you've seen that silence often says what words cannot. True flow is not just movement, it's the rhythm between movement and stillness. It's the breath in and the breath out, the pause before a choice, the quiet before a response. Flow doesn't mean constant action, it means aligned action. And alignment can only happen when there's space to feel what is true. In this space, you learn to stop reacting out of habit. You don't need to respond immediately to everything. You take your time. You move when the moment asks for it, not when your conditioning demands it. You become more patient not because you're trying, but because you're connected to something deeper than urgency. That patience becomes strength. You become someone who others turn to, not because you have all the answers, but because your presence offers stability. Your stillness allows others to soften. Your quiet listening becomes a refuge, not because you're doing something special, but because you've stopped needing to be anything other than present. Stillness also reveals the subtle attachments you might not have seen before. When you stop moving, you begin to notice the inner cravings, the need for validation, the hunger for distraction, the discomfort with emptiness. These impulses only become visible when you pause, and once seen, they begin to loosen. This loosening is not forced. It happens through gentle awareness. You don't fight the craving, you sit with it. You observe its shape, you allow it to rise and fall. And in that allowing, you reclaim the energy that was tied up in chasing. You find a freedom that no amount of doing could give you. This freedom carries into your daily rhythm. You start building space into your day, not just physical breaks, but intentional moments of inward return. You let your attention settle between tasks. You breathe before entering a room. You give yourself permission to reset before speaking. These moments are invisible on the surface, but they change everything beneath. They create a deeper rhythm, one where you are no longer rushed, no longer pulled by the noise of the world. You still move, you still speak, you still work. But your movement comes from rest. Your words come from silence. Your choices come from clarity, not pressure. Even creativity begins to shift. Instead of forcing ideas, you create space for them to arrive. You let the silence speak first. You trust the gaps. You stop needing everything to be figured out immediately. You start respecting the unknown, because you know that silence is not emptiness, it's possibility. This also transforms how you relate to change. You stop needing immediate answers. You stop fearing transitions. You start feeling the space between what was and what's coming as sacred, not wrong. You stop treating uncertainty as failure. It becomes a doorway, a pause that allows new insight to emerge, a resting point before a new rhythm. In this resting point, you realize something profound. There is no real need to rush. Life unfolds with its own intelligence. You don't have to push the river. You don't have to control what's next. You just need to stay close to presence. That presence becomes your guide. It tells you when to act and when to rest, when to speak and when to listen, when to wait and when to move. You begin to honor transitions as part of the practice. The end of a conversation, the breath between two thoughts, the stillness before a new decision. You stop skipping over these spaces. You stop filling them. You respect them, because you've learned that these pauses are not empty, they are full of guidance. Stillness sharpens your discernment. You stop reacting to surface energy. You start feeling the undertone, the real need beneath the noise, the real timing beneath the pressure. You sense when something needs attention and when it needs space. This intuitive knowing grows not through more effort, but through deeper quiet. And when the time does come to move, to speak, to act, you do so with confidence. Not the confidence of certainty, but the confidence of alignment. You've waited, you've listened, you've moved from stillness. And that kind of movement carries clarity that no rush could ever create. This is the Dharma of stillness, not as a retreat from life, but as the rhythm that brings life into harmony. Not as a way to escape the world, but as a way to meet it with grace. It's the pause that resets your breath, the silence that restores your strength, the space that reconnects you with what matters. You carry this stillness with you, into each step, into each word, into each challenge. You walk not with haste, but with presence, not with anxiety, but with calm. And others feel it not because you say more, but because you need to say less, because your silence speaks clearly, because your stillness moves deeply. This is how flow becomes real, not by constant motion, but by rhythm, not by always doing, but by knowing when to rest. And rest, when done with awareness, becomes your most powerful action. You stop reaching, you stop forcing, you let life breathe. And through that breath, everything begins to align. You return again and again, not to effort, but to presence. Not to noise, but to quiet. Not to the next thing, but to this. And here, in the stillness you no longer avoid, you finally remember what it feels like to be fully, deeply alive. When you begin living from stillness, your choices become cleaner. You're no longer pulled by urgency, no longer rushing toward the next moment. You listen more deeply, act with more care, and rest without guilt. In this space, something begins to rise on its own, not through pressure, not from fear of consequence, but from something more rooted. A sense of rightness, not morality written down in rules, but an inner knowing that says, clearly and simply, this supports peace, this does not, this heals, that harms. This is where ethics stop being a system and start being a natural extension of awareness. Not a list to memorize, not commandments to obey out of fear or guilt, but behavior that grows from seeing clearly. In Buddhist teaching, this is silethikal conduct, not as a set of fixed instructions, but as a natural expression of presence. It arises because, when you are deeply awake, certain actions no longer make sense. Not because they're forbidden, but because they no longer align with who you are when your mind is clear. When awareness sharpens, causing harm feels heavy. Dishonesty leaves a residue. Taking what isn't freely given creates inner dissonance. You don't need someone to tell you it's wrong. You feel it. It doesn't align with your natural rhythm. The more presence you carry, the more your behavior becomes effortless. You're not avoiding harm because you've been told to. You're not interested in harming because the clarity inside you doesn't support it. This way of living removes the burden of trying to force yourself to be good. You stop treating ethics like performance. You stop worrying about appearances. Your choices become guided by attention, not by image. You feel your intentions before you speak. You pause before you act. You begin to notice that when you're fully aware, the tendency to deceive, manipulate, or grasp starts to fade, not because you're controlling it, but because it no longer matches your inner state. You don't have to force kindness. It comes naturally when the mind is still. You don't have to pretend to care. Compassion grows without effort when you are fully present with someone's suffering. You don't have to memorize the rules. You feel what nourishes connection and what disturbs it. You become more honest, not out of obligation, but because truth feels lighter. You're generous, not to gain approval, but because withholding feels constrictive. In this way, ethics become alive, responsive, adaptive. You're not following rules blindly, you're meeting each moment as it comes and sensing what supports clarity and peace. This doesn't mean you always get it right, but when you don't, you feel it. You don't need punishment. You feel the imbalance within, and that becomes your teacher. You begin to see the difference between control and care. Controlling behavior uses morality as a weapon. It tries to manage people, judge them, create categories of good and bad. It tightens. But natural ethics relaxes. It arises from understanding that your freedom is deeply connected to the freedom of others, that what you say and do either supports awareness or distorts it. You move through life with more gentleness. You're not looking for ways to get ahead by bending the truth. You're not using charm to manipulate. You're not justifying selfish actions with clever thinking. Instead, you feel the subtle difference between wanting and grasping, between truth and performance. And your body tells you, your breath tells you, your nervous system tells you. This kind of ethical living isn't fragile. It's not dependent on someone watching you. It's not threatened when no one's there to praise or punish. It's steady because it comes from within, from your own experience, from watching what creates conflict and what eases it, from recognizing the patterns that lead to more suffering and choosing not to repeat them, not because someone told you to, but because you're tired of the inner friction they bring. You begin to see how dishonesty disturbs your mind. Even small lies leave ripples. Even small acts of greed carry weight. When you're sensitive, when your attention is steady, these effects are clear. You feel the cost. And so, not stealing, not lying, not harming, these aren't restrictions. They are forms of respect. For others, yes, but also for the peace you've cultivated inside. This respect extends to how you use speech. You become more intentional. You speak less often from impulse. You listen more before offering advice. You no longer speak to dominate or impress. Words become something to offer, not something to use. You value honesty, but not bluntness. You value kindness, but not flattery. You know when to speak, and when silence is more honest. Even how you think about others begins to shift. You stop feeding resentment, even if it feels justified. You notice how holding grudges distorts your clarity. Forgiveness becomes less about letting someone off the hook and more about releasing yourself from the poison of carrying it. You're not pretending everything is okay. You're just choosing not to keep burning from within. Natural ethics also affects how you relate to desire. You stop taking whatever you want just because you can. You recognize that craving can grow endlessly if left unchecked. You see how consumption, even when available, often leaves you more restless than before. So you learn to pause, to check, to feel if what you're reaching for is needed or just habit. In this way, restraint is not about deprivation, it's about freedom. You're no longer ruled by every urge. You don't need to satisfy every impulse. You feel more stable because you're not constantly pulled. And that stability makes you strong. Not hard, not cold, just deeply centered. That center becomes your guide. You don't look outward for rules. You look inward for clarity. You don't argue about what's right or wrong in theory. You pay attention to what creates peace and what disrupts it. You learn from your own life. And that learning is always alive, always updating, always growing. You become more humble, because you see how easily the mind can justify almost anything. You don't trust every idea. You check it against presence, against your breath, against the tone of your voice, the feeling in your gut, the quality of your attention. You know that even good intentions can become weapons if they're not rooted in awareness. So you keep returning to presence, to stillness, to breath. You don't try to be perfect. You try to be honest. You don't try to be impressive. You try to be real. And from that honesty, you find that kindness isn't something you need to manufacture. It's already there when the noise settles. This way of living doesn't make you naive. It makes you precise. You're not avoiding harm because you're afraid of being punished. You avoid it because you see clearly what it does to others, to yourself. You stop treating people as objects to get things from. You start seeing them as extensions of your own experience, equally worthy of peace. In moments of tension, this clarity holds. You feel the pull to defend, to attack, to protect an image, but you've seen what that leads to. So you breathe, you wait, you speak slowly. You don't give in to the first wave of emotion. You return to what you know, that your peace matters more than being right, that your presence is more healing than your argument. Even when you fall short, you don't spiral into shame. Shame is just another form of clinging. You reflect, you learn, you recalibrate. Because now, your behavior isn't about proving worth, it's about maintaining balance. You make amends not to earn forgiveness, but to restore alignment. You apologize not to repair an image, but to clear your heart. Natural ethics becomes your path, not your performance. It's something you feel, not something you follow. It grows from your awareness, not from fear. And because it's lived, not memorized, it adapts, it listens, it responds to what's true. You stop needing to ask what the rules are. You start asking what supports clarity, what reduces harm, what aligns with love. And love, in this space, is not attachment or sentiment. It is the natural outflow of being fully present. It is the spontaneous expression of an untroubled heart. It needs no justification, no reward. It moves because it must. It gives because it can. It includes every only, not just the people you like, but the people you used to judge. Because awareness includes everything. It doesn't divide. This inclusion is not soft or vague. It's exact. It means you stop using awareness to excuse your behavior. You become more responsible, not less. You don't avoid ethics, you embody them. Not to gain approval, but to protect peace. Not because someone told you to, but because you've seen what happens when you don't. You keep returning to presence, because presence reveals what rules cannot. It shows you when you're clinging, when you're lying to yourself, when you're using others to feel secure. It brings the truth into focus, gently but clearly. And that truth guides you better than any rule book ever could. This is how ethics become a joy, not a burden, a path, not a prison, a reflection of your depth, not a test of your worth. You live more simply, you act more cleanly, and the space you've created inside begins to touch everything around you, not loudly, not perfectly, but steadily, quietly, and always with presence. When ethical clarity arises from awareness, you begin to live in a way that feels aligned from the inside out. You're no longer following rules out of habit or fear. You're moving from understanding, from direct experience. Your decisions carry less resistance. You feel more spacious inside because nothing is forced. But even then, something deeper may still be shaping your life without your full awareness. A quieter force, not a law, not a rule, a word, a feeling, a belief. Should. You should be more productive. You should be calmer. You should call more often, speak less, do more, feel less. These internalized voices don't yell, but they shape your behavior in every direction. They often sound like wisdom. They sound like responsibility, ambition, humility. But beneath them is pressure, not presence. When you're not watching closely, these inherited expectations become the lens through which you see yourself and others. They aren't always conscious. That's what makes them powerful. The most persistent form of control isn't always external, it's what you've learned to do to yourself. From family, culture, religion, schooling, even spiritual teachings, you've absorbed thousands of messages about how life should look, how you should behave, what success, goodness, confidence, love, growth should feel like. These messages don't just shape your choices, they define how you relate to yourself. Many people live their entire lives trying to measure up to these internal demands without realizing that the standards were never truly theirs. They live in a constant loop of self-correction, shame, and anxiety, not because they are failing at life, but because they are measuring it through someone else's vision. Letting go of that pressure doesn't mean rejecting your values. It means examining where they came from, and whether they actually match what you've come to know through experience. This process begins with awareness. You start to notice your inner language, the quiet urgency behind decisions, the guilt that shows up when you rest, the tension in your stomach when you say no. Each of these may point toward a shoulda-conditioned belief that has taken root in your nervous system. You don't have to fix it immediately. You simply begin to question it. Where did this idea come from? Who told me I needed to be this way? What would happen if I didn't obey it? What would I choose if I felt free? These aren't abstract questions. They break the spell of automatic behavior. They shine light on the hidden authority figures in your mind, voices that sound like your own, but were planted there long ago. Letting go of should isn't rebellion, it's truth-seeking. It's peeling away what was layered over your clarity. Often, these beliefs were created for protection, to belong, to avoid punishment, to win love. They served a purpose, but that purpose may no longer serve you. What kept you safe as a child may be keeping you stuck as an adult. This isn't about blaming the past. It's about seeing that you're no longer required to live by it. You don't have to remain loyal to ideas that no longer match your experience. You don't have to keep proving anything to a voice that's never satisfied. And you don't have to feel guilty for choosing a life that looks different from what was expected. You begin to find your own rhythm, your own voice. Not the one shaped by what people think of you, but the one that comes from direct contact with your life. And it may be quieter at first. It may not come with the certainty that should once gave you, but it comes with something more valuable: honesty. When you live by inherited rules, you often feel conflicted even when you're doing the right thing. When you start choosing from presence, that conflict dissolves. There's less effort. Not because life becomes easier, but because your inner resistance begins to fade. You're no longer split between what you feel and what you've been told to feel. There's no more pretending. Letting go of should also affect how you relate to others. You stop projecting expectations, you stop comparing timelines, you stop needing others to live a certain way so you can feel secure. You realize that everyone is responding to their own inherited voices, and not everyone has questioned them yet. This brings compassion, not judgment. You also stop needing to explain your choices. When you live from clarity, you don't feel the same urge to justify. You know that some people will not understand your path, and that's okay. You're not living to meet an invisible standard. You're living to stay in alignment with what you know is real. This changes your relationship with effort. You stop striving to prove worth. You stop pushing for validation. You don't abandon effort, you refine it. Your energy is no longer consumed by trying to be good enough. It's directed into what actually matters, what brings peace, what feels alive. You also notice where guilt used to lead. The subtle shame after saying no, the self-judgment for needing rest, the pressure to keep up. Each time guilt arises, you pause. You ask, is this mine? Or was it given to me? This pause doesn't mean you avoid responsibility. It means you carry it from choice, not from fear. As the grip of should loosens, your inner world becomes lighter. You start making choices not from reaction, but from reflection, not from pressure, but from presence. You begin to ask new questions, not, "What should I be doing right now?" but, "What feels true right now?" Not, "What do others expect of me?" but, "What do I know in my own experience?" This doesn't mean you'll never feel pressure again. The world is full of noise. But now you meet that noise with awareness. You notice when an old voice returns. You feel the pull to obey it. And instead of reacting, you listen. You ask again, "Is this true? Is this kind? Is this helpful?" And slowly your answers become clearer. This clarity is not rigid. It evolves. It grows with you. What feels right today may not feel right next year, but the difference is, now you are the one listening. Now you are the one choosing. No longer following default settings. No longer outsourcing your authority. This is what maturity feels like, not control, but conscious alignment. This kind of living requires honesty. You will see where you've been performing, where you've been trying to appear good, wise, useful, lovable. You'll feel the grief of living for others' approval. You'll feel the cost of abandoning yourself to meet someone else's expectations. Let yourself feel it. That grief is sacred. It means you're waking up. From here, you begin to trust yourself in a new way. Not the self shaped by ego, but the self you return to when all the roles fall away. You become less reactive to praise, less crushed by criticism. You stop editing your truth just to be liked. You start telling the truth because not telling it feels heavier. And in that honesty, you find connection not just with others, but with your own life. You stop needing every answer. You stop clinging to perfection. You let things unfold. You let people be who they are. You give yourself permission to be uncertain, to try, to fail, to begin again. That's how you begin to live in flow, not because you're doing it all right, but because you're doing it with full presence. You become someone who others feel safe around, not because you fix them, but because you're not pretending. You don't need them to fit your story. You don't carry invisible expectations. You let them be where they are. And that spaciousness is healing. That freedom invites truth. Letting go of should doesn't lead to chaos. It leads to responsibility rooted in awareness. You begin to respond to life as it is, not as someone told you it should be. You become more creative, more honest, more grounded. You act from clarity, not conditioning, from love, not pressure, from alignment, not fear. And all of this begins with one question. A soft, honest question asked in silence. What am I still holding that isn't mine? Let that question guide you. Let it reveal. Let it unwind the old shapes. You don't have to rush. You don't have to fix everything overnight. You only need to begin where you are. Keep returning, keep questioning, keep softening the grip of those internal rules. They are not you. They were given to you. You're allowed to let them go. You're allowed to choose again. And as you do, life begins to flow not according to anyone's plan but according to your own truth. Quiet, simple, real, free. When you stop living from the weight of other people's expectations, something remarkable begins to happen. Your energy returns. Your voice becomes clearer. You feel yourself moving from an inner truth, not from obligation. But in this return to presence, another deep question quietly arises. What about all that came before? The choices made in the past, the patterns inherited, the actions taken without awareness. What happens to all that momentum? This is where karma becomes more than a mystical concept or a moral scoreboard. It becomes a living stream. Not a rigid accounting system, but a flowing field of cause and effect, always in motion, always responding to intention. Karma is not keeping score, it's shaping direction. Every word, thought, and action sends a ripple, not as punishment or reward, but as movement. If you see karma only as judgment, you live in fear. You believe you must pay for every misstep, carry the past like a burden, and prove your worth by perfect behavior. But that's not how karma works. Karma is not a prison, it's a process. And you are not being sentenced. You are being invited to participate. Karma is movement, not memory. It is not waiting to punish. It is simply responding to where your energy flows. If you act from anger, your experience will be shaped by the mind of anger. Not because the universe is angry at you, but because anger brings contraction. If you act from clarity, your experience will reflect that clarity, because clarity opens space. This is why karma is not fixed. It's fluid. You are not trapped by your past. You are influenced by it, yes. But at every moment, you are stepping into the stream again. And the quality of that step determines what comes next. Not by fate, but by rhythm. Not by punishment, but by direction. The key to working with karma is understanding intention. Action alone is not the full picture. The mind behind the action is what gives it shape. You can give with resentment, and it creates tension. You can speak truth with cruelty, and it creates harm. But when the heart is clean, even small acts ripple with grace. Intention does not need to be perfected, needs to be seen. That seeing begins with attention. You start observing your own inner climate before you move. You ask, what's driving this choice? Is it fear, guilt, greed, or is it generosity, care, curiosity? You don't need to judge yourself. You just become honest. And from that honesty, your relationship to karma shifts. You are no longer unconsciously reacting. You are responding with awareness. This shift is subtle but powerful. You stop thinking of karma as a cosmic rulebook and begin to feel it as feedback. Life shows you what energy you're carrying. Not to shame you, but to reveal where alignment has been lost. When suffering repeats, you listen. When resistance arises, you explore. Karma becomes your teacher not with lectures, but with echoes. Those echoes are not punishments. They are reflections. And the moment you see them clearly, you're no longer bound by them. That's the grace of the present moment. It holds the power to interrupt even the oldest cycles. You are not doomed to repeat the past. You are free to choose again, not later, now. The idea that karma takes lifetimes to shift is both true and incomplete. Yes, some patterns are deep. Some tendencies run across years, families, cultures. But awakening happens in a moment. Recognition is immediate. And when recognition comes, a new pathway opens. Not magically, but mindfully. You stop blaming your past, but you also stop ignoring it. You see how your current state is shaped by previous choices, not just your own, but collective ones. You carry ancestral echoes, cultural weight. But again, this is not punishment, it's context. It's material for transformation. It's the starting point, not the end. When you understand karma as a stream, you begin to engage with it gently. You don't panic when mistakes happen. You feel the ripple. You correct course. You don't obsess over perfect purity. You aim for sincerity. You start moving through life less like a performer and more like a participant in an unfolding field of energy. This deepens your sense of responsibility, not as burden, but as privilege. Your choices matter not because you'll be rewarded or punished, but because they shape the field for yourself and for others. You start seeing even your smallest actions as part of a larger dance. You become more careful, not out of fear, but out of love. This care becomes effortless when rooted in awareness. You no longer need external motivation. You're not obeying laws. You're responding to reality. You see what heals. You see what harms. You stop trying to outsmart karma, and instead, you step into it with integrity. You also begin to forgive more easily, yourself others. You realize that everyone is acting from their own level of understanding, that much of what people do is shaped by pain, by fear, by patterns not yet seen. Forgiveness does not erase karma, it releases entanglement. It frees you from needing to carry what no longer belongs to you. Forgiveness is not permission. It's clarity. It's stepping out of the stream of reactivity and choosing peace. It's not forgetting, it's remembering that you are free to move differently now, even if others don't. Even if the world isn't fair, karma doesn't promise fairness. It promises responsiveness. And in that responsiveness, you find power. You find that life is not happening to you, it's moving with you. Your presence changes the current. Your choices create momentum. You don't need to fix the whole stream. You only need to show up fully in each step. That step matters. That step shapes the path. You begin to walk more slowly, speak more thoughtfully, act with more precision, not because you're afraid to mess up, but because you've seen how much can flow from a single moment of presence. A kind word, a deep breath, a patient silence. These are not small things. They change everything. Over time, your karmic patterns become less dense. You still feel anger, but you don't act from it. You still notice fear, but you don't follow it. You see old reactions rise, but now you have space. You don't suppress them, you let them pass. Like leaves on a stream, they move, you remain. This space is where wisdom begins to grow. You start sensing what to do without needing to analyze everything. Your decisions become more intuitive, not reactive, not strategic, just aligned. You're not rushing to avoid pain. You're moving from inner clarity, and the results feel different, less entangled, more free. You don't fear karma anymore. You respect it. You learn from it. You listen to it. It's not your enemy, it's your mirror. And when you meet it with openness, it guides you not toward perfection, but toward integration. This integration touches every part of your life. You stop compartmentalizing. Your work, your relationships, your inner world, they all become part of the same flow. You don't try to act one way in public and another in private. You stop splitting yourself. You live from one stream, clean, simple, clear. You also begin to trust the timing of your own unfolding. You stop rushing to undo every mistake. You know that seeds take time, that growth is not linear, that some lessons are slow and sacred. You walk with patience, not resignation, but reverence. And when challenges come, you don't collapse. You stay in the stream, you feel the weight. You ask what it's teaching. You let it shape you without hardening you. Even in difficulty, you know you're not being punished, you're being refined. This refinement is gentle, not through force, but through repetition, returning to presence, returning to the breath, returning to what's needed now, again and again, choosing alignment, letting the stream move, letting it teach, letting it clear what no longer serves. Eventually, the stream carries you, not like a current sweeping you away, but like a rhythm supporting your steps. You're not pushing anymore, you're not calculating, you're simply living, awake, present, free from fear, free from past, free from future. You no longer treat karma like a ledger of who you've been. You see it as a path you're shaping now, not by erasing the past, but by responding to it with new clarity. Each action, a drop in the stream. Each word, a ripple. Each breath, a choice. And in those choices, you are not earning your worth. You are revealing it, moment by moment, thought by thought, intention by intention. A stream unfolding from the deepest part of you, quiet, powerful, and always flowing forward. When you no longer treat karma as a rigid ledger and instead meet it as a flowing stream, your actions lose their heaviness. Each intention becomes lighter, more responsive, more honest. You stop bracing for punishment or chasing reward. You begin to live in rhythm, not reaction. From here, something deeper begins to stir, something softer, a current that has always been beneath the layers of strategy, fear, and self-protection. It is the impulse to love, not the kind born from longing or needing, but the kind that simply wants to give. Love is often misunderstood as attachment. It gets tangled in wanting, in holding, in hoping someone or something will complete you. But when you begin to see life clearly, when you rest in awareness and move in presence, you notice a different kind of love, a love that doesn't bind, a love that doesn't need to possess, a love that doesn't arise from emptiness, but from fullness. This love is meta-loving kindness, not romantic, not transactional, not based on what someone gives you, but offered simply because love is the most natural thing to offer when you stop grasping. Metta is not weak, it's not sentimental, it's powerful because it's rooted in clarity. It arises without condition, and it continues without clinging. When the heart is bound, it contracts. It becomes selective, guarded, defensive. It measures who deserves care. It builds walls. It closes quickly when someone disappoints. But when the heart unbinds, it expands, not because everyone is safe or easy to love, but because your love is no longer about the other. It's about your own capacity to remain open. You don't need people to be perfect for your heart to stay soft. You no longer offer kindness in exchange for comfort. You offer it because it's what aligns. You offer it because you've seen that grasping creates suffering, and that when you let go, love flows freely, not as attachment, but as truth. This doesn't mean allowing harm. It doesn't mean losing your boundaries. In fact, it strengthens them, because now your love is not driven by fear of being alone or desire to be needed. It is given from clarity, not desperation. And from that clarity, you know when to stay and when to walk away. You know when to forgive and when to let go. Your kindness is firm, not fragile. Metta begins with the self, not as ego, but as practice, because if you cannot offer gentleness to your own heart, your love for others will be distorted. It will carry the hidden weight of self-rejection. So you start where you are. You soften toward your own pain. You recognize your own effort. You speak inwardly with respect, not criticism. Not because you're perfect, but because you're worthy of compassion. Loving yourself without grasping means you stop needing to fix everything before resting. You stop needing to meet some imaginary standard before you feel peace. You offer warmth to the places inside that still ache, not to change them, but because they hurt. You allow yourself to be whole even as you heal. This inner unbinding changes your outer relationships. You no longer use love as a form of control. You stop keeping score. You stop loving in order to be loved. You stop performing kindness to stay safe. Love stops being a transaction and becomes an expression of presence. It flows when it's true and rests when it's not. There is no pressure in this love, no rush. You give without emptying yourself. You listen without losing your center. You support without absorbing pain that isn't yours. Because when your love is not attached to outcome, it's free to be clean, not filtered through expectations, not twisted by need. Just love, as it is. You also begin to see that love is not always soft. Sometimes love is space, sometimes it is distance, sometimes it is a boundary. Loving without grasping means loving with honesty. It means not enabling harm. It means not clinging to someone just because you've built stories around them. You let people be who they are, not who you want them to be. This requires courage. It requires releasing the hope that someone will finally meet all your needs. It means standing in the truth that no one is responsible for your wholeness. And from that truth, love becomes lighter. You give because it's your nature, not because you're hoping to be saved. Even your understanding of connection begins to change. You stop searching for completion in others. You stop assigning people roles they never agreed to play. You meet them where they are. You let the relationship evolve or dissolve without panic. You recognize that no bond is permanent, and so every moment of real connection becomes sacred. In metta, love is not limited to intimacy. It expands outward. It touches strangers. It includes people you disagree with. It even reaches those who have caused harm, not by denying pain, but by refusing to carry hatred, because hatred binds you, resentment drains you, metta frees you. It lets you love without needing the past to change. This kind of love is not emotional indulgence, it's clarity. You love because love clears the heart. It doesn't mean you excuse harm or avoid truth. It means you stop choosing bitterness as a shield. You stop closing off your own joy just to punish someone else. You stop waiting for perfect conditions before letting love move. As this practice deepens, you feel the difference between love and attachment more clearly. Attachment is tense. Love is open. Attachment demands. Love gives. Attachment fears loss. Love accepts change. And when you unbind the heart, you stop mistaking one for the other. You can still feel sadness when love shifts, but it doesn't break you, because you were never clinging to the person. You were allowing love to move through you. That love is still there. It may no longer attach to a form, but it continues, because love doesn't need a direction, it just needs space. That space grows when you stop trying to protect your heart from breaking, because it will break, again and again. But each time, it breaks open, not down. And what comes through the cracks is more tenderness, more depth, more understanding. You stop fearing pain. You meet it as part of loving fully. You don't run from loss. You don't run from impermanence. You let love come and go like breath, each expression complete, even if brief. You stop needing guarantees. You rest in the knowing that love is not in the object, it's in the offering. This allows you to hold joy more lightly. You stop grasping at good moments. You enjoy them fully while they're here. And when they pass, you don't cling, because you trust that what matters isn't the length of an experience, but the presence within it. That's what makes love alive. You start seeing the beauty in simple expressions, a kind glance, a generous word, a quiet presence. You stop waiting for grand displays. You stop measuring love by intensity. You begin to understand that consistency, honesty, and spaciousness are what make love sustainable. You also begin to love in ways that don't need to be seen. You offer kindness anonymously. You wish well silently. You bless others without needing them to know. This invisible love is not less powerful, it's often more pure, because it comes with no strings. The heart, when unbound, becomes generous, not only with others, but with yourself. You stop punishing yourself for not being perfect. You stop holding on to shame like a badge. You begin to forgive, not to forget, but to release the grip, to give yourself back to the present. Forgiveness becomes an act of love, not approval. You let go of what you no longer need to carry. You stop demanding that the past change. You learn from it. You bow to it. And then you return to what is now. That return is where love always lives. You don't need to be healed to love. You don't need to have it all figured out. You only need to stay present, to stay soft when you want to close, to remain open even when it hurts. That openness is your strength. It's what makes your love resilient. You keep offering metta not to change the world, but because the world changes when love moves without resistance. Even if no one notices, your presence shifts the field. Even if nothing looks different, your heart has left a trace, a silent warmth, a small freedom. Love without grasping is not a technique, it's a return, a coming home to what you are when the stories fall away, when the mind stops managing, when the body breathes fully. You become less concerned with being loved. You become more focused on being loving. And that loving is not about effort. It's not about performance. It's about remembering. Remembering that you don't have to earn the right to care, that you don't have to hold to feel deeply, that you can let life pass through you, and in that letting go, love becomes who you are, quiet, steady, free. When the heart stops grasping, love stops needing to explain itself. It no longer seeks labels or certainty. It becomes spacious, patient, and free. You give not to receive, but because giving is your nature. You let go not to detach, but to remain open. This softness doesn't come from weakness, it comes from the strength of not needing to control. But even as the heart softens and presence deepens, the mind still sometimes demands clarity. It wants answers. It wants the world to make sense. It wants straight lines in a universe drawn in circles. And yet, life doesn't always offer clarity in the way the mind expects. Often, the more awake you become, the more contradiction you see. The more wisdom deepens, the more questions dissolve before they're answered. You find yourself facing things that don't fit into categories, truths that seem to cancel each other, emotions that don't align with logic, choices that aren't clearly right or wrong. And if you're not careful, the mind will panic in the face of this. But you don't need to fix the confusion. You can learn to stay with it. Zen points you toward this space, not the space of answers, but the space of not knowing. Not as ignorance, but as intimacy with life's mystery. In Zen, you're not trying to figure everything out. You're letting go of the idea that everything needs to be figured out. You learn to rest inside paradox, to find peace not after clarity, but before it. This begins with shifting how you relate to confusion. Instead of tightening, you open. Instead of rushing for the right answer, you slow down enough to feel the question fully. The question becomes your teacher. You hold it like a cup of tea, warm, alive, enough. You don't pour it out just because it isn't sweet. Zen uses koan, short, paradoxical stories or statements to dissolve habitual thinking. A koan is not a puzzle to solve, but a mirror to look into. It confuses you on purpose. It confronts the mind's need for resolution. It pulls you into a space where logic breaks and insight begins. Koans don't give you something to figure out. They invite you into direct experience. They show you how often your mind seeks comfort in conclusions. When a teacher asks, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" the question isn't absurd, it's alive. It pushes you beyond words. It reveals the space between thought and knowing. That space is where presence opens. Living like this means becoming comfortable with not knowing, not giving up your intelligence, but allowing deeper intelligence to move through you. You stop needing to define every feeling. You stop needing to explain every experience. You stop needing to choose between two extremes. Instead, you learn to rest in the middle, not indecisive aware. The mind loves binaries, right and wrong, success and failure, good and bad. But most of life doesn't live in those lines. Most of life is both and neither. It shifts, it blends, it contradicts itself. Zen invites you to meet that directly, to stop forcing clarity where there is only movement. This doesn't mean abandoning discernment. It means allowing deeper seeing to arise. When you stop clinging to the need for certainty, something more honest appears. You see the situation as it is, not as your expectations wanted it to be. You stop reacting from habit and start responding from spaciousness. Confusion becomes part of the path. You let it be here without pushing it away. You ask, "What is this moment teaching me that clarity cannot?" And often, the lesson is patience, presence, humility, the ability to meet life without needing it to fit your ideas. This way of living allows more curiosity. You become softer in conflict. You listen more openly. You stop needing to win arguments. You let others have their truth without needing to destroy it. You don't become passive. You become rooted in something deeper than opinion. Paradox begins to feel natural. You can hold two truths at once. You can be strong and tender, clear and uncertain, grounded and evolving. The tension between opposites is no longer a problem. It becomes the space where growth happens. The pressure to be one thing dissolves. You're allowed to be fully human. Even your inner world becomes more spacious. You stop judging yourself for feeling mixed emotions. You stop dividing parts of yourself into acceptable and unacceptable. You hold your joy and grief in the same breath. You stop trying to force harmony. You let wholeness arise from allowing all of you to be here. Zen teaches you to sit with what is, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. You stop using thought to escape the moment. You use attention to enter it more fully. You don't need the moment to be resolved. You just need to be awake in it. This way of being deepens your trust in the unknown. You stop demanding guarantees. You don't rush to label experiences as good or bad. You let them unfold. You listen to what they reveal over time. That patience becomes your teacher. You realize that not knowing is not a weakness, it's a space where truth has room to grow. In practical life, this looks like choosing honesty over perfection, choosing listening over defending, choosing quiet over certainty. You become more comfortable saying, "I don't know," not as a lack of power but as a sign of deep awareness. You stop pretending. You start resting in the truth of the moment, even when it's incomplete. This helps you become more skillful in uncertainty. You respond to changes with less panic. You adapt with less resistance. You don't need to predict every outcome before taking a step. You don't need a 5-point plan to have faith. You walk one step at a time, staying close to what's real. Even spiritual practice becomes more alive. You stop measuring progress. You stop needing to feel a certain way. You stop looking for proof that you're evolving. You simply return to breath, to silence, to the space where nothing needs to make sense. And in that returning, you find the most unexpected thing: peace. Because peace is not the result of solving everything. It's the absence of needing to. It's the space that opens when you stop resisting what is unresolved. It's the calm that arises when you stop grasping for control. You also stop needing life to be fair or logical. You stop insisting that things work out in neat lines. You allow messiness. You allow contradiction. And in that allowing, you discover grace. Grace that holds what the mind can't understand. Grace that doesn't need everything to fit before it flows. This changes how you move through relationships. You no longer demand consistency from others. You stop expecting them to be the same person every day. You allow room for contradiction, for complexity, for change. You learn to love without understanding everything. You listen more, fix less. You also stop needing yourself to be figured out. You stop analyzing your every thought. You stop labeling every emotion. You allow your inner world to be dynamic, layered, unpredictable. You learn to meet yourself with the same openness you offer others. That compassion becomes a daily practice, not from sentiment, but from truth. Zen invites you to live more lightly, not carelessly, but without needing to hold everything in place. You don't need to know where you're going to walk with purpose. You don't need to have answers to live with integrity. You simply show up, fully, with presence, with curiosity. Koans, like life, don't always resolve. They open, they stretch, they dissolve boundaries in your thinking. They are not meant to be understood. They are meant to wake you up. Life is the same. It isn't asking to be decoded. It's asking to be lived, not controlled, not explained. Just met fully, honestly, without flinching. So let the contradictions stay. Let the mystery breathe. Let the not knowing be sacred. There's more clarity in openness than in the illusion of certainty. There's more truth in questions that are lived than in answers that are memorized. And the next time your mind tightens around a need for clarity, pause. Feel the breath. Notice the urge to resolve, and gently let it go. Let life remain open. Let paradox be a doorway. Let not knowing become your teacher, because in the silence between certainty and confusion, presence is waiting, quiet, patient, and already whole. When you stop needing everything to make sense, a new kind of presence opens. You no longer live in the tension of always solving. You start moving with life instead of against it. You soften into paradox, allowing things to unfold without rushing toward conclusions. And in that openness, something subtle begins to draw your attention inward, not to another idea, not to another explanation, but to the breath, the simplest thing, the first and last thing, the most overlooked teacher of all. The breath is not asking to be controlled. It never was. It's been happening your whole life without your effort. And yet, you've spent so much time trying to manage it, adjusting it, shaping it, making it right. But the truth is, the breath knows how to move without your interference. And once you begin to trust that, you start to learn the deepest lesson it offers. Life doesn't always need your doing. Sometimes it only needs your allowing. Letting the breath breathe you means stepping out of the role of the controller. You stop manipulating. You stop trying to optimize every sensation. You stop forcing rhythm. Instead, you feel the inhale as it rises. You feel the exhale as it releases. You let go of shaping it. You just let it happen. And something softens inside. You begin to realize that the breath is not a tool, it's a reflection. It mirrors the state of your mind and body. When you're anxious, it shortens. When you're present, it deepens. When you stop interfering, it finds its own balance. It regulates not because you tell it to, but because the system knows how to return to harmony when given space. This practice is not just about meditation, it's about life. Because the way you breathe reveals the way you live. Are you grasping? Are you holding? Are you afraid to release? Are you trying to get to the next moment before this one is complete? Letting the breath breathe you shows you all of this without judgment, just observation. Non-doing begins here, not as passivity, but as receptivity. You're not giving up movement. You're shifting the source of movement. Instead of acting from tension, you act from alignment. Instead of forcing presence, you allow it to arise through stillness. The breath becomes the bridge between awareness and action. When you interfere with the breath, it tightens. When you let it move freely, it returns to flow. And that flow begins to touch everything. Your speech slows. Your decisions come with more ease. You begin to trust pauses. You begin to see that space is not a void, it's where wisdom appears. You learn how to rest without collapsing, how to move without rushing, how to respond without reacting, because you've started listening to something deeper than thought. You're tuned into the rhythm of life itself, moment by moment, breath by breath. This listening doesn't require effort, it requires presence. You feel the rising and falling not as something to track, but as something to surrender to. The breath breathes, and you follow. Not as an observer, but as part of the movement. There is no separation between the breather and the breath. There is only breathing. This dissolves the illusion of control. You begin to see how much of your tension comes from trying to manage what was never meant to be managed. You stop gripping experience. You stop analyzing every sensation. You start feeling from the inside out, directly, without filters. And in that directness, simplicity returns. You don't need to perform presence. You don't need to chase calm. You simply stop interrupting what is already unfolding. The breath teaches you how to trust your body, trust this moment, and most of all, trust that not everything needs to be touched by effort. This trust is subtle. It grows slowly. You may still find yourself trying to control. That's okay. Each time you notice, you soften again. Each time you tense, you return. Not as correction, but as remembering. The remembering that life knows how to live itself, and your breath is proof. In time, this relationship becomes embodied. You begin to live from your center, not as a technique, but as a state of being. You stop living on the edge of anxiety. You drop into yourself. You carry a quiet awareness that doesn't need to comment on everything. You're present, but not performing. This presence carries into your choices. You start making decisions from a place of steadiness, not urgency, not fear. You wait for the natural timing. You don't rush the moment. You don't override your intuition. The breath becomes your compass. If it tightens, you pause. If it opens, you move. You begin to respect the intelligence of rhythm. You see how every inhale is a beginning, every exhale a letting go. Every pause between is a space of potential. You stop filling the spaces with noise. You let the quiet speak. This quiet reveals your patterns. You see how often you interrupt your own rest, how often you reach for stimulation out of habit, how often you resist stillness because it feels unfamiliar. But now, instead of avoiding that discomfort, you stay. You let the breath guide you through it. You let yourself feel without needing to fix. This feeling is not always pleasant, but it's honest. You stop chasing peace as a sensation. You start seeing peace as the absence of resistance. And the more you stop interfering, the more you feel the peace that was always waiting beneath your effort. The breath shows you how to live without bracing, without rushing, without tightening around what you cannot control. It teaches you that presence doesn't require intensity. It only requires contact moment by moment, without needing anything to be different. And that contact transforms your nervous system. You start to feel safe without needing certainty. You rest without needing exhaustion to justify it. You begin to live in alignment with the body's wisdom. You're no longer overriding its signals. You're listening, responding, trusting. This creates space inside you, a space that others can feel. You become more grounded in conversation, more available in connection. You don't disappear into your mind. You stay with what's real. Even when emotions rise, you remain anchored not by force, but by breath. You stop needing to be impressive. You stop performing calm. You stop trying to seem present, because you're no longer operating from effort. You're moving from simplicity. The breath breathes you, and that is enough. This also affects how you engage with change. You no longer grip when life shifts. You don't try to control the rhythm. You let it move through you like breath. Each change a new inhale, each loss a full exhale. You let go without collapsing. You receive without grasping. This receiving is not passive. It's awake, attentive. You're not disengaged. You're simply not rushing to manage every detail. You trust that presence is enough. That awareness is intelligent. That the breath carries insight if you stop drowning it in control. And this changes how you relate to effort itself. You still act. You still engage. But now the effort is clean. It's not compulsive. It's not anxious. It's not driven by fear of not doing enough. It's rooted in response, not reaction, in flow, not force. Letting the breath breathe you is the practice of surrender. But it's not about giving up. It's about returning to what moves on its own, what rises and falls without your control, what carries you when you stop resisting. You realize you are not the source of life. You are the space it moves through. And the more you step out of the way, the more clearly it flows. The more peace you carry, the more trust you embody. Not as belief, but as breath, always moving, always returning, always home. You've now traveled through the deepest waters of stillness, breath, thought, impermanence, love, and presence. You've touched the quiet truth behind flow, not a method, but a remembering. That life is not a problem to solve, but a rhythm to trust. That you don't need to grip every moment. You only need to soften into it. You've seen that flow isn't passive. It's not drifting. It's wise responsiveness. It's living without clinging, loving without losing yourself, speaking without building walls, feeling without fearing the wave. You've been invited to rest inside the breath, to let go of old roles, and to question the voices that told you life had to be earned. Now, you don't have to hold all of it. Just let the parts that touched you settle quietly in your heart. Let them rise again tomorrow, or the next day, or whenever they're ready. You don't need to force change. You are already flowing in the right direction. Slowly, naturally, lovingly. If you made it to the end, drop a comment below and write, "I trust the flow." Let's find each other in this space, this still, awake space, where people choose peace over pressure. And if you found even one breath of comfort, one moment of clarity, one spark of insight in this journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's more waiting for you. Not more noise, more quiet truth. Let's keep growing together, one breath at a time. Until next time, may your heart stay open and your path stay soft.